agonizingly slow. Bob Dotson has more on that. Bob, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt. So far, only 5 people have been pulled from the rubble alive. Thousands more are still lost. Their relatives wandering from hospital to hospital. Parents looking for children. Friends searching for friends.
We definitely have the whole Bellevue area. Bellevue, NYU.
Imagine the nightmare. The injured, missing loved ones scattered among 21 hospitals.
We've been to every hospital yesterday. We went down to Beekman Downtown Hospital at about 1 in the morning.
People line up 500 deep outside information centers waiting for word.
I've gone everywhere and I just cannot find my brother. My sister and my mother, we're all worried. We want to know where he is. I just want to know where my brother is. Oh, I just want to know if he's all right.
They are given numbers to call, but...
These are busy.
Chris Matroni anxiously searching for his 57-year-old father, Mark, a commodities banker.
Calling and calling and calling, just getting nothing and nothing and nothing. It's just ridiculous.
Exhausted, their tears of sorrow mix with frustration. People have taken to tacking up pictures of their loved ones on trees. Davin Peterson and Fred Cox last seen trapped above the flames of the World Trade Center. Annalise Peterson is still searching for her brother and boyfriend.
I just cracked. I mean, I just screamed. I just knew that there were the 2 people, some of the most important people in my life were in that building, in those buildings. And I thought to myself, oh my God, and that you think of their face and like, you just want them out. You want them out.
Rosa Osa hasn't slept since the tragedy began. Her boyfriend, Ed Calderon, is a security guard who lived through the World Trade Center bombing in 1993.
We're hoping that somebody recognizes him and give us a call and let us know where he is. Maybe he's unconscious somewhere in a hospital and he hasn't been able to identify himself.
The problem, most of the injured show up at hospitals without identification. Purses and wallets lost. Hardly anyone in that long line found a loved one who is missing. They cling to the hope that rescue efforts will continue longer than their patience, because they point out the people who are missing are more than what happened to them. They are family.
We have to realize that these aren't numbers, these are people. Don't stop looking, don't give up, because there could be someone down there. It could be one person, and doesn't matter. 1 in 1,000, it sounds, oh, that's ridiculous. Doesn't matter, it's a person. Every individual is important. Every person has a family.
And for those waiting in these lines, it is time for simple family things. An arm around a shoulder, a hug. The people here can't move tons of steel and debris, but can offer each other that. Trauma specialists say those who must wait with uncertainty can be as deeply affected as those who are injured. So volunteer grief counselors are now helping the people on those long lines. Matt?
Yeah, Bob, you talked about the people who are walking around the streets holding up pictures of their loved ones, hoping that someone will recognize a face and say, maybe I walked down the stairs with that person or evacuated with that person. I've seen pictures this morning also, Bob, of news vans that are parked in the area, and they have been plastered with pictures, people walking up, taping them to the vans, hoping that the news reporters will actually broadcast the pictures of their loved ones. What can people do, Bob, to find the injured more quickly?
Well, the city is responding by opening up a new center. It's called the Armory at 26th and Lexington Avenue, which is a few blocks north of the Wall Street area. And if you go there, or if you call there on their phone numbers, they will have the information, one-stop shopping.
All right, Bob Dotson in Lower Manhattan this morning. Bob, thanks very much. Once again, here's Katie.
Matt, thank you. There is no waiting for some families. They know. Among them, the family of pilot Charles Burlingame. He was at the controls of American Airlines Flight 77 out of Dulles International Airport before hijackers crashed it into the Pentagon. Bradley and Deborah Burlingame are Charles' brother and sister. Bradley and Deborah, what can we say? Our deepest and profound sympathies to you and your family.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bradley, let me start with you. Your brother sounds like he was quite a guy. Can you tell us about him?
Well,
Chick, as he was called to our family and friends, always wanted to fly. He was appointed to the United States Naval Academy by the President when he graduated from high school, and immediately after graduation from Annapolis, went into pilot training and eventually flew fighter planes for the United States Navy. After leaving the Navy is when he began his long career for American Airlines, and he was a seasoned pilot, and he loved to fly ever since he was a little boy. We have pictures of him holding wooden planes that he built when he was 5, 6 years old.
In fact, he had worked for the airlines for quite a long time, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
After he left the Navy, he began in 1979 flying for American Airlines, and he loved it. He loved the company. He loved all his friends, and I should tell you that we were informed very early on after the crash of his place on that aircraft, and we were grateful to his friends, American pilots, and dear Navy friends who came to our sister-in-law's aid in Virginia, and they're still helping her now.
And in fact, Bradley and Deborah, I know that Chick, your brother, his birthday was September 12th, and he was going to celebrate by going to the Angels game because he was a huge Angels fan and loved the Lakers as well. And he had actually wanted his wife, Sherry, who lives in Virginia, to come with him to Los Angeles, but he couldn't get good seats for the game, so he decided that she should, in fact, stay at home.
Over the years, Chick would come out to California, and he'd come out here, and a few days in advance, he and I would try to plan on going to a game, and it was typically whether or not we could get good seats or not. And because he graduated from Anaheim High School, right where the Angels play, and so he was a longtime Angel fan and Lakers fan as well.
He has a daughter, Wendy?
Yes, Wendy. Wendy lives in New Jersey. She's grown now, 26 years old, and she's, of course, having a very difficult time.
Deborah, did your brother ever express fear or a concern? Is probably, he doesn't sound like a guy who was fearful of much, but was he ever concerned about the prospect of problems of this nature, of a hijacking, when he was piloting an aircraft?
I never heard my brother talk about hijacking. He was always, the only thing he verbalized to me were when there would be questions of the safety of air travel itself. He was always adamant that it was one of the safest activities you can engage in. Apart from that, he was always very focused on the safety issue. He was a real professional and highly trained. As you probably know, Navy pilots are highly trained for all contingencies, and they are trained to, well, they are sort of self-selecting type people who go into this business. They know how to perform under pressure and under extreme pressure. So he didn't actually ever talk about hijacking, because hijacking in this country is such well, a rarity, and it rarely culminates in this kind of outcome. So, but I'm very, very confident that whatever happened on his plane the morning that he and his passengers and crewmates perished, that he performed with incredible courage. I know that they would have had to incapacitate my brother or kill him or overpower him in such a way that no human could have sustained. So we're confident about that.
In fact, I've talked to families or people who have relatives who are pilots, and every last one says that no commercial pilot would ever agree to basically harm people using the aircraft as a weapon, that they would sacrifice the people on the plane before they would ever cause a larger loss of life.
It's absolutely true, and the irony of this for Chick and our family, Sherry, our brother Mark, is that when Chick left an active service in the Navy, he went into the Naval Reserve, and actually retired from the Naval Reserve just a couple years ago. And all during those years, he worked at the Pentagon. that building was very dear to him. The irony that that aircraft struck that building is something I just can't imagine my brother allowing to happen.
And not only that, Katie, but that plane hit the west side of the building, which is right adjacent to Arlington National Cemetery, where our parents were both recently buried. That is sacred territory to my family and to my brother, and I guarantee you he would never have allowed that plane to come down in that particular place.
Sacred territory to so many Americans. I understand that you hope that he'll be buried there as well.
We know that he always planned to be buried there when his life would end. Of course, we didn't expect him at age 52 to be buried there, but we know there's a lot of other tragedies that are being dealt with and at the Pentagon, and there'll be lots of burials at Arlington in the coming weeks.
Well, your brother certainly sounds as if he was a fine man and a true patriot, and again, our deepest sympathy to both you, Bradley and Deborah, and your entire family.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This is a News 10 NBC special report. America under siege.
Morning, I'm Gabe Dalmuth. We interrupt today's show's coverage this morning to bring you some local developments. The Greater Rochester International Airport is still closed at this hour, but that's about to change. Lynette Adams is live at the airport this morning with the latest. Lynette?
Gabe, this airport is waiting for certification to open. We're told that could happen as early as 11 o'clock this morning. Right now, as you mentioned, the airport is still closed to the public. However, the Secretary of Transportation has reopened the system. Airports have had to make a number of changes in order to get the certification to reopen. Airport Manager Terrence Slaybaugh tells us that was all done yesterday. Slaybaugh is in a meeting right now with airport officials, and we expect an update sometime around 9:30 or 10 o'clock this morning. But I can tell you once again, the airport is expected to open today, probably around 11 o'clock. It will be a limited operation, so you should certainly call your airline before coming here to the airport. Reporting live at the Rochester International Airport, Lynette Adams, News 10 NBC.
Lynette, as I look at the picture behind you, I see absolutely no activity whatsoever. I do not see any aircraft personnel, mechanics, or anyone walking around. Have you seen any aircraft or airline officials or staff at the airport this morning at all?
No, there is no indication that there's staff here from any of the airlines or any of the airport workers. When we came in this morning, we were greeted by Monroe County Sheriff's deputies who were closing off the airport, and that's pretty much all we've seen. There is no activity whatsoever here at the airport.
And again, the best advice, call ahead before you make any sort of
Absolutely.
Lynette Adams reporting live for us this morning. The local Red Cross is still taking donations of blood, especially O negative and O positive. You have to have proof of your blood type to donate. And let's give you a number to call for more information on what the Red Cross needs locally. There is the number 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. Let's head over now to Rich Cornelia for a quick look at our weather. Rich?
Thanks, Gabe. Right now, live look at our 10 NBC Weather Lab triple Doppler is showing a few of those showers associated with that cold front coming on through. We had a pretty good downpour downtown just a few minutes ago. You can see that moving eastward now, just pulling out of Webster, pulling out of Penfield and Perrington, headed to western portions of Wayne County. That'll be sliding eastward and out of our region. And then for the rest of this morning, a few scattered showers here and there. But once again, shouldn't be anything major, very localized areas of rainfall. Satellite radar in the motion shows you that front coming on through. The clouds are going to be stuck with us today. A cool northerly breeze will keep temperatures low to mid-60s all afternoon with some more showers through today and even into tonight. There could be a few more raindrops, lows tonight in the upper 40s. Friday will feature a little more in the way of sunshine, chilly, highs upper 50s, low 60s. Then Saturday and Sunday, the weekend looks good with sunshine, temps in the middle 60s. Gabe?
Rich, thank you very much. And for those of you who are coming into work this morning to downtown Rochester, we want to tell you that the Midtown and Crossroads parking garages, which were closed Tuesday and Wednesday, are now open. Let's return to the Today Show coverage, and Matt Lauer talking to Dr. Albert Fernandez.
Back out to the field. We had a young man yesterday who'd been there for almost 24 hours trying to dig out some of the rubble when he found his brother's body. And that was devastating, not only for him, but for many of my team here. Those are the kind of situations that we're seeing with the rescue workers, the firefighters, the police.
Yeah, that's amazing bravery being shown by those people. Can we talk for a second, Doctor, about some of what would be the symptoms of, I guess, what we commonly refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder? And I guess that's not too severe a term to use with this situation, is it?
No, it's not. Technically, post-traumatic stress disorder is something that doesn't set in for a month after the traumatic event. A lot of these people will indeed have post-traumatic stress disorders or symptoms of it. What we see now initially is people who are having flashbacks, reliving those traumatic events over and over and over again. A lot of the imagery that we're seeing on television, for example, is significant, that it will help keep these visions, these images in people's minds for the days to come. That also leads to a lot of the anxiety. The things that we would see initially are people having difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, feeling sadder than usual. Those are the kind of things that we see initially. Most people will get better from that. But we do know from what's happened before in Oklahoma City, in other natural disasters outside and inside of this country, that the sooner people are able to talk about it, and especially the trained mental hygiene workers, the better their prognosis is and the less severe the symptomatology will be.
Is it normal, doctor, for people to experience some unrealistic fears right now, whether it be about planes or tall buildings or something like that?
Absolutely. It's very easy for the events to kind of mushroom out of proportion. We have people here that came that we were trying to get in an elevator to go upstairs to one of our other counseling centers, and most people refuse to get in an elevator. That's an example of a kind of a cross-pollination, if you will, of all these stressors. Everything is going to become stressful to a lot of people in New York City for the next few days until there's some more stability and a sense that normalcy is returning.
Just in dealing with the people that I've come in contact with, I notice a lot of people whose moods are fluctuating somewhat wildly. I mean, at what point do you look at someone and say, okay, they're just obviously under a lot of stress, and when do you cross the line and say someone may need professional help?
That's an interesting question, because I think right now everyone needs professional help. Everyone that was involved, everyone who's had family involved, everyone who's seen the carnage on TV, people jumping from burning buildings. I think all of those people need to be debriefed, if you will, in some way. Usually those things will get better as we get further away from the traumatic event. The people that will need intense treatment are the people that don't get better after several weeks, after several months. And there will be a small percentage of people that will have symptoms that increase. With the last World Trade Center bombing back in the mid-90s, we had people complaining of symptoms related to the event a year after the event was over. So we would expect to see that here by tenfold.
Yeah, and what your point is a very important one. Even people who are acting normally now and who say they're okay doesn't mean that 3 to 4 weeks from now they couldn't exhibit some signs of this problem. Dr. Albert Fernandez, doctor,
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt.
And if you'd like some information on help for post-traumatic stress disorder, you can visit our website at today.msnbc.com. Katie?
Matt, thank you. Air travel remains at a virtual standstill this morning. Federal officials want to make sure their security procedures are fully in place before planes fill the skies again. NBC's Robert Hager is at Washington's Ronald Reagan National Airport this morning with the latest. Bob, good morning.
Good morning, Katie. Well, as you can see, the planes are still lined up out there, idle. They were supposed to get back in the air yesterday noon, then that was changed until this morning, and now it may be later today or even tomorrow. Not because the airlines and the airports aren't ready, but because the FBI and CIA aren't ready.
The law enforcement and intelligence agencies putting a hold on full-scale operations until it's absolutely clear any threat has completely passed. Only a very few flights have been allowed in the meantime to get passengers to their original destinations, but thousands of other flyers will remain stranded for a third day in a row.
Does anybody want to be part of a carpool going to San Francisco?
They're going to try to stay here and get a flight tomorrow, or maybe take Greyhound. I'm not sure what my plans are right now.
A peek at new security measures coming. After passenger screening, more use of a second backup test to sense for explosives. An absolute ban on knives in carry-on luggage, which, believe it or not, weren't banned before. A security search of every aircraft before passenger boarding. Tighter restrictions on access to runway ramps. A temporary ban on passenger planes carrying mail or cargo. And additional numbers of sky marshals, armed guards disguised as passengers, seen here drilling. There are a few sky marshals used already for international flights. The government now says it will deploy more to guard domestic airports and planes. Meantime, more details on the last hijack. The one that left Newark was hijacked over the Midwest and turned back toward Washington. Turns out a passenger named Jeremy Glick told his brother-in-law from a cell phone that he and some other passengers had come up with a plan to resist the terrorists, stop them from doing whatever they'd planned, even if it meant losing their own lives. Investigators still don't know why that flight was the only one that crashed short of its intended target. May never know. But it could have been what Glick threatened in that last phone call, a struggle for control of the plane.
By the way, that account of a passenger hoping to take on the hijackers on that plane jives with the story the mother of another passenger on that plane told us here on Today yesterday. She too had talked to her son on that flight by cell phone. Well, again, the airports may open at about 11 o'clock Eastern time today, but one other point, the FBI and CIA requests that had kept them closed may also have had more to do with keeping accomplices in the hijacking from leaving this country than concerns about getting the airports ready. Katie?
So all the security precautions, Bob, at airports across the country are in place?
Yes, I think they would not get the airports back in order unless they were ready, and so I believe they'll be set.
And how is the search for the cockpit voice recorder, the black boxes? That you said yesterday, the hope of retrieving that was, I guess, best at the site of the Pittsburgh crash.
It is, and at this point we don't know that it's been found, and I'm not sure that we'd hear when it had been found, because case now. Normally when the NTSB is in charge of the case, they tell us right away that the cockpit voice recorder has been found, but when it's the FBI running things, they may not tell us when it's found, but so far there's no word at all that it's been found.
All right. Bob Hager in Washington. Bob, I'm sure we'll be checking in with you throughout the morning. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Katie.
8:03 now. Here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thanks. Michael Bregman worked for 32 years for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and during that time he also served on the federal government's Aviation Security Advisory Committee. Mr. Bregman, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
One of the things we've been talking about, and maybe we should get right to this, is over the last couple of days people have said, for example, at Logan Airport, how could two planes have been hijacked? Newark Airport, Dulles in Washington. You don't think this was a real breach of airport security, do you?
No, not really. I think that before we start pointing fingers at people, you have a situation where you had the intelligence community and the law enforcement community essentially with little or no information on the situation. And you have a group of people who are, we'll say, marginally paid people at the security screening checkpoints who were taking passengers on board, and no evidence of any guns or knives obviously apparent at that point in time, so folks just boarded, and you're dealing with people essentially who have a suicidal mentality. So this is obviously the worst security nightmare in the world.
Yeah, what you're saying is for the people manning those security checkpoints, there was no reason to stop these people. There was no object in their luggage that wasn't allowed by regulation on an airliner.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything so far, and I'm just getting it from the news like everyone else, but I haven't heard anything that would contradict that.
And even in the reports we heard where perhaps the passengers were threatened with a bomb, there's no indication that there was actually a bomb in any of those planes, perhaps just something that they used as a threat.
It would appear that way. I mean, I have every confidence in the ability of the FBI and ATF, Secret Service, Customs, INS, DEA, and all those put together to get to the bottom of it. And as soon as all the scenes are done, I'm sure we'll have more information on whether or not that was true. But it would appear that it was a ruse.
I have to be honest with you. This, to me, is more alarming, Mr. Bregman, because it indicates that you don't need a gun, you don't need a bomb, you don't need plastic explosives to wreak havoc on an airliner.
No, you really don't. You know, an airplane in and of itself with thousands of pounds of jet fuel, you know, hijacked and flown into some facility or building with obviously the murder of innocent people is the worst nightmare in the world.
And what we're hearing right now is apparently these hijackers were very keenly aware of a numbers game. There were enough of them on board each plane to control the passengers and overpower the crew.
Yeah, it would appear that way.
Tell me about what changes can be made then. Obviously, it seems as if we're probably talking about changes not in on-site airport security, but in regulations.
Well, I don't know about that. I would tend to think that currently the airlines, the airline carriers are responsible for security screening checkpoints. I think at some point in time we need to say this is an inherently government function, and form some kind of group, entity, organization, uniform division that does this kind of screening.
Yeah, but what do you want them to screen for is what I'm asking. I mean, do you want it to be illegal to take on a pocket knife or a razor or anything like that?
No, no, I think it goes beyond the mechanical process of looking at just implements. I think there are different things in profiling people and engaging in a dialogue and things that we'll say that the El Al model uses, where the security screeners actually will engage in conversation with passengers and try to verify. It goes beyond just a mechanical process.
Yeah, I've flown on El Al, and it really is somewhat amazing. At several points during the process, from when you arrive at the airport to actually board the plane, you're not confronted, maybe that's the wrong word, but you are approached by someone.
That's correct.
And why do you think that's so effective?
Well, I think you have people who are paid and trained at a sufficient level to know the different profiles and protocols here that can identify people who may pose a threat. And currently you have people who are very basically, not to knock the people themselves, but they're minimum wage folks with limited non-uniform training that essentially fit the current requirement.
We're hearing some rumors, Mr. Bregman, and I spoke to Attorney General Ashcroft this morning about this, that in the future, when regular air traffic and travel resumes, we could be looking at trained, plainclothes U.S. Marshals armed on flights. Is that a good idea in your opinion?
You know, absolutely it's a good idea. You know, currently one of the things that we were working on was, of course, the carriage of weapons by armed federal agents right now, which number in the tens of thousands, and making sure that the identity of the agents was kept free from being counterfeited or, you know, protracted by any outside entity. And I think that loophole has been very successfully closed. But certainly, as they used in the early 70s, Sky Marshals were extremely effective back then, and I think they would prove equally effective now.
Michael Bregman. Mr. Bregman, thanks for your information. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.
8 past the hour. Here's Katie.
Matt, thank you. Tuesday morning's terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania came as a major surprise to the U.S. intelligence community. Senate Intelligence Committee Chair Senator Bob Graham and Vice Chair Senator Richard Shelby join us from Washington this morning. Gentlemen, good morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Good morning, Katie.
One of the worst terrorist attacks in history in the world, perhaps the worst, occurred under your watch. What went wrong, Senator Graham?
We don't know the answer to that question now, Katie. Yesterday we had a briefing with the CIA and the FBI, and I asked them as part of their analysis if they would give us their best assessment of where the gaps were in our intelligence system that could have allowed such a thing to happen. My suspicion is we're going to find at the top of the list that we haven't been making the investment in human intelligence, the kind of spies that can get inside a terrorist cell, and that we've seen our eavesdropping capability go deaf as people begin to communicate through computers, for instance, as opposed to over the telephone.
So in other words, Senator Shelby, I know you agree with Senator Graham that we need to invest much more in people, spies, if you will, actually on the ground. But many experts say it is quite difficult, if not impossible, to infiltrate these terrorist cells, and they in fact have their own counter-terrorists in place to deal with potential people along the, of that nature.
Katie, that's exactly right. It will be very difficult, but it's not impossible to do this. But when we get caught flat-footed as we were Tuesday, this was a shock to the American people. It was a shock to a lot of us, too. But things like that will happen again. We have to make an overall new commitment to intelligence. I agree with Senator Graham on this. We've been advocating this, but I think more people are going to start listening starting a couple of days ago.
You all know, of course, that officials at the State Department, and I'm sure at every level of government in Washington, have been combing through communiques, any kind of letters, any kind of thing that might have indicated that this was about to transpire. Has anything glaring surfaced as they have done that?
They have not completed the review and not indicated to us what they have found, but you put your finger on a third issue, and that is we have the ability to collect an enormous amount of information. Now, we can fill the Library of Congress almost every day with the information that we are able to pull out of the air or to get by photographs.
Right.
Problem is, you've then got to have a human being who can sort through all that and figure out what of all that information is really relevant and important. We need to build up that part of our intelligence capability as well.
Katie, our collection, I believe, ability is very good, but our analytical ability, as Senator Graham alluded to, needs a lot of improvement. But on the committee that Senator Graham chairs, I used to chair, we will be doing our oversight work here because we cannot ever afford to be caught flat-footed like this again.
Senator Shelby, you were chair of this committee when the USS Cole was bombed and it was assumed or determined that Osama bin Laden was responsible. Well, why wasn't anything done to beef up intelligence then, or at least keep better track of his actions and his associates?
Well, it was. As a matter of fact, Senator Graham and I have been the leaders on the Intelligence Committee, and for appropriations, we have been pushing this. We're doing better. We've done a lot better in the last 5 years. This was a big intelligence failure, but there have been a lot of successes there. And I think in the future, you're going to see a lot more successes.
And Senator Graham, in closing, I know that you've mentioned that you would support lifting the U.S. self-imposed ban on assassinations. Why?
Frankly, that ban has been substantially altered by interpretation over the last several years. And the United States has had relationships with others which have given us the capability, if we think it's in our national interest, to render incapable a potential adversary.
Are you all surprised, just I know that was supposed to be my last question, but one that comes to mind, that just how large a paper trail some of these suspects have left in this country, rental car agreements, going to flight school here in this country. Was that surprising to you?
Not surprising to me at all, because at the end game here is destruction, and of course their own self-destruction. So they're pretty open in a sense, but they also keep it pretty close to them, Katie.
All right, Senator Richard Shelby and Senator Bob Graham. Again, gentlemen, thank you both very much for talking with us this morning. 8:13 now. Here's Matt.
Katie, the U.S. military is still reeling from the attack on the Pentagon and is gearing up for a possible retaliatory strike. NBC's Pentagon correspondent Jim Michalczewski has the latest on that. Mick, good morning.
Good morning, Matt. A series of high-level meetings involving Pentagon, State Department, all the national security agencies, including the White House, today, beginning just about now and continuing through most of the morning. Nobody's talking about any kind of specific plans, any specific targets. They're not that far yet. But U.S. military planners are, in fact, looking at all contingencies. There have been a series of contingencies on the table, constantly reviewed, actually, by military commanders. Excuse me, Matt. Constantly reviewed by military commanders, and they're taking a close look at those plans right now. Of course, officials stress they first have to prove definitively who's responsible. But we're told that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld is taking the position that once those responsible are determined, that not only should we go after those directly involved in these terrorist attacks, but it should be a broader-based effort to go after everyone who offers any kind of support or harbor to those involved. Translation, they're looking at Osama bin Laden and the ruling government of Afghanistan,
Right.
the Taliban.
All right, Mick, thanks very much. Jim Michalczewski at the Pentagon this morning. Katie?
All right, Matt, thank you very much. As the nation begins the long road toward healing after Tuesday's horrific events, it's important to remember the victims, all the victims, not only those among the dead and wounded, but those who have been traumatized by watching these events unfold. First Lady Laura Bush has spent a great deal of time in the last 2 days focusing her energies on our nation's children. Mrs. Bush, good morning to you.
Good morning, Katie.
I'm sure you are as heartsick as everyone in this country about what has happened here in recent days.
And I saw a little bit of your coverage earlier when you interviewed a number of the people who are looking for loved ones in New York. And those are the people, all of the people who are directly impacted by this tragedy, who have lost a parent or a sibling or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or even a family friend, are the ones that everyone in the country really need to focus on right now to make sure that they're taken care of, that they know how much all Americans love them and how much all Americans are sending their sympathy to them. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about children who might not be directly involved, but who have watched this chaos on TV, who have seen this destruction, and who now are fearful. And I want to talk about what parents can do to reassure their children, especially their young children, to let them know that they're safe and that their parents will keep them safe, and their parents can watch for certain behaviors that their children might exhibit that show that they're fearful or disturbed by all they've seen on television.
Well, you're so right, because as a mother and having so many friends who are mothers and fathers of young children, of course that is a major concern for families all across the country, because suddenly everyone, children and adults alike, frankly, feel so vulnerable.
That's right.
Tell me, I know that you've been talking to experts about this.
That's right.
What are they telling you in terms of reassuring our children? Because it's an uncertain world.
It is an
and you want to be
uncertain
truthful as well as reassuring.
And that's exactly what they say, that we should acknowledge our own feelings of sadness, our own feelings of confusion, and let our children know that we also share their feelings, that we're sad, but that we're together and we're there for them. We should definitely restrict television watching for very young children. It's not fair for us to let really young children see a lot of television images that are horrific. So we can do more positive, constructive things with our young children than watch TV with them.
I mean, not only very young children.
Yeah,
I'd just like to interject,
certainly.
but children who are
in
older.
elementary school, that's right. Or
My
any age.
10-year-old, I'm not allowing to watch television because it will only exacerbate her anxiety.
That's right, and her fears. And children are reassured by routine. So if parents can have a relaxed and calm atmosphere at home, if they can go on about their normal routine, share meals with their children, read stories to them, and certainly this time more than ever, a bedtime story is appropriate, even for older children as old as 10 years old or older, to help your children relax before they go to sleep and calm down before they go to sleep. Children love the reassurance of their parents' own voice. They like to hear their parents talk to them and read to them, and I think this is a time that all American families can get closer together, draw closer together, and all of us can really focus on making sure our children feel reassured and safe.
I understand that you wrote a couple of letters, Mrs. Bush, to school children, and you've distributed them to state superintendents today.
Yeah.
Can you read a portion of it or tell us about those?
I wanted school children. I've worked so much as a teacher myself, but I've worked so much around the country with schools. And let me just say before I read this that let's don't forget teachers. Teachers are also suffering the same sadness, the same confusion we are, and they are reassuring our children and 30 or 40 other children during the day. So I hope parents will also go up, visit with their child's teacher, give their child's teacher your support, figure out ways you can help them as they deal with the very same issues that we're dealing with, and take care of your children. Here's what I wrote. This is to children, to elementary school children. I want to reassure you that many people, including your family, your teachers, and your school counselor, love and care about you and are looking out for your safety. You can talk with them and ask them questions. You can also write down your thoughts or draw a picture that shows how you are feeling and share that with the adults in your life. And one part of this, I think children really want to be constructive. They want to do something positive, and if they're old enough, if they're teenagers or university students, they can probably give blood themselves or volunteer with some relief organization. If they're younger, they might want to make red, white, and blue ribbons to give to their children in their schools to wear, or maybe write a card or a letter to their own firefighters or policemen in their own community in honor of the lives of the firefighters and policemen that were lost.
Or a thank you note. And I know that a woman from Reno, Nevada called me yesterday. I just happened to pick up the phone in the newsroom and said her daughter had started a penny drive in her school to send money to those who had been injured or to the families who had lost loved ones.
That's
but being
a great
proactive
idea.
is extremely therapeutic, isn't it?
It really is. It really is.
Speaking of that,
and also students can just help other students in school, put their arms around them, share their grief with them. I think they'll have a lot. They can really feel a solidarity with the children who actually have lost loved ones in this tragedy.
Speaking of being proactive, Mrs. Bush, I know that you've been encouraging Americans to donate blood, and some people have gotten mixed messages about the blood supply. I know that some people have been turned away from individual blood centers in New York because I think they just can't handle the influx. But the bottom line here from the American Red Cross is blood is needed.
That's right. We want to develop a big strategic blood reserve. The Red Cross was already in the midst of doing this, and they've now ordered freezers for blood banks all across the country. Blood can be frozen and can last for up to 10 years. So if you get turned away when you want to give blood today or tomorrow, wait a week or two and then give blood. Universities can set up blood banks in a week or two, 2 or 3 weeks, when these freezers arrive at different blood banks around the country. And I know college students and other faculty members at colleges would like to give blood then. There's something very moving about the people who literally want to give a part of themselves for the people who have been hurt or injured in this tragedy.
Mrs. Bush, obviously you are spending all of your time thinking of other people, their situations, and the children of this country. But I want to ask you about your own situation, which must have been quite terrifying. What was your reaction, or how did you learn that, as White House aides have said, both the White House and Air Force One were targets as well?
Well, I didn't learn that until after the crisis was over. I was in the Senate with Senator Kennedy and Senator Judd Gregg. I was getting ready to give to talk to the Education Committee about early childhood education when we got the word that they were evacuating the Capitol and evacuating the White House. And so I was taken to a secure location. And like every parent, I called my children immediately as soon as I could get them, to reassure them. And then I called my own mother for the comfort of her voice. I know that people all over the country call their loved ones to reassure them and to send their love to them, and I did that. So I really was never really fearful. There were people here at the White House, though, who were, when they evacuated the White House, were told to run. And today I have a member of the clergy who happens to also be the wife of a White House, someone who works at the White House and a very good friend to a lot of my staff members, coming to talk to my staff, many of them young, very young women who were here when that happened at the White House. So I want to encourage parents and businesses and schools and every place around the country to set up mental health help for parents. And parents, if you feel like you're having difficulty dealing with your own emotions and your own sadness, you might want to go talk to a clergy member or to a counselor so that you can help your children deal with it.
Mrs. Bush, before we go, I want to ask you about this. Your husband, President Bush, has faced criticism from some quarters for not returning immediately to Washington following the attacks, for going to Barksdale and then Offutt Air Force Base and then to Washington, D.C. There are reports that he was quite antsy to return, and Karl Rove says, quote, the president said, "I don't want some tin-horn terrorist keeping me out of Washington." I understand it was Vice President Cheney who suggested the president stay away from Washington, at least initially. Is that accurate?
I don't know that. I haven't heard that. I know it was the Secret Service that really felt like the president. They, of course, their duty is to protect the president, and they diverted his plane that way because they wanted him to be safe.
Laura Bush, First Lady Laura Bush, thank you very much, Mrs. Bush, for spending some time with us this morning and trying to reassure families all across the nation. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Katie.
It is 8:25 now. Here's Matt.
All right, Katie, thanks very much. Just a reminder, according to Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta, airspace over the United States will reopen at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. Good news for the people who have been stranded in other destinations. Also good news for people trying to get to New York to find out more information about their loved ones. NBC's Washington Bureau Chief and moderator of Meet the Press, Tim Russert's been covering the story from the beginning. Tim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
I want to talk to you. Obviously, the president has said he wants some kind of quick military military response. He has the backing of Congress. As we'll mention in a second, he has the backing of the American people. What are the considerations going through his mind right now? What are the other things he has to deal with before he can take that action?
Matt, we have to know exactly who to hit. And once we determine that, what are the other ramifications from such a strike? For example, if we decide that it is Osama bin Laden and he is harbored in Afghanistan and the Afghanistan government refuses to turn him over and we attack Afghanistan, what does that mean for its neighbor in Pakistan? Will Pakistan allow us to use that as a launch site? Matt, I can report to you that on Tuesday, the head of the CIA of Pakistan, the equivalent, was in Washington to soothe Washington about Osama bin Laden and his relationship to militants in Pakistan. So it's a very dicey situation. Pakistan is petrified that an attack on Afghanistan will mean refugees from Afghanistan, which could create insecurity within Pakistan. Number two, as we talked about yesterday, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, what happens in those countries with militant fundamentalists? A very complicated geopolitical plan has to be devised and not just let our anger be vented. It may cause more problems than what we can solve.
Otherwise, we have kind of a domino effect, as you talked about yesterday. Before I get to the poll numbers here, Tim, yesterday I asked you about, does the president need to go to Congress for approval before any military action? And you said rightly so, legally no. But I do get word this morning that he's working with Congress on legislation that would authorize military action. Explain the difference there.
Open-ended legislation, Matt. It would not be an official declaration of war, but under the War Powers Act, which was passed after the Vietnam War, Congress wants to be consulted. It is politically and probably legally better to have that umbrella approval, but no one would ever fault the president if he unilaterally decided tonight to do something if he felt it necessary.
All right, let's take a look at the results of a new NBC News poll that was conducted during the night and see what the country thinks about this. The first question we want to talk about, do you approve of the president's handling of this terrorist activity? 80%, Tim, give him approval marks. Only 8% disapprove. Not bad for the president.
Democrats, Republicans, independents, men, women, across the board, Matt. Everyone now has rallied behind their commander-in-chief.
Was the president stung by the criticism coming from both Democrats and Republicans concerning his absence from Washington in the immediate hours following the attacks?
Yes, but it was muted as from some limited corners, but nonetheless, yes. And the White House worked very actively last night and during the day to say, folks, understand the reason the president went to Louisiana and went to Nebraska is because we had credible evidence that the White House could have been attacked. They now say that the Secret Service received a phone call that Air Force One may have in fact been a target. It seems quite clear that the plane that struck the Pentagon, in fact, did approach the White House. As to the direct threat to Air Force One, the White House has not been forthcoming.
This next question gives you an idea of just how much in shock and how angry the American people are. The question is, should the U.S. take forceful military action even if it means risking further retaliation or the threat of war? 83%, Tim, said yes.
Matt, the anger is just boiling over. You can feel it in every corner of this country. People want someone to pay a price for this, even if it means protracted war. And I believe that that only is going to build when we see the brothers and sisters of the pilot you had on this morning. When these, quote, victims become real people in our lives and our hearts and our minds, people are going to demand action.
Here's another question that's surprising. Compared to the attack on Pearl Harbor, how do you rate this attack 2 days ago? 66% said it's more serious, 25% said equally serious, 5% not as serious. Does this tell us about the enormity of this event, or that people tend to feel most strongly about what's most recent?
Both, but when 90% of American people believe this is as serious or more serious than Pearl Harbor, we understand the magnitude. The fact is, 2,400 people died at Pearl Harbor, military personnel, one government attacking another, one army attacking another. This was an attack on civilians. Brothers and sisters, people who had not signed up for the military, and the death toll is going to be tens of thousands. People understand that.
And people obviously in this country now realize once and for all we are no longer isolated from the rest of the world.
Matt, we always use the word globalization and the global economy. this is in fact one world when it comes to terrorism. Nobody is immune. And we talk about our lives and returning to normalcy. We will turn to what we think is a normal life, but we will redefine what is normal.
Well, you know, I'm interested in you just said that, because I want to talk to you about one last poll question here. Ask people, would they change the way they live, such as how and where they travel, because of concerns about terrorism? I have to say I was surprised by this. 64% said no, 35% said yes. My gut reaction here is that we're seeing some bravado here, Tim.
And people are going to go about their lives and try to live them as, quote, normally as they can, but we've lost a lot of innocence, particularly our children. They have been numbed by this experience. They feel threatened, we feel violated. We'll absorb it, and we'll try to very much bring it within ourselves and integrate it into our normal lives. But we all know deep down it's a very dark moment that is going to affect our freedoms and our liberties. We'll do our best. We'll hold our flag high. We'll tell people, we'll be defiant, but we also know we're going to be a lot more security conscious and a lot more careful and a lot more protective of our loved ones and ourselves.
Tim, if you can just stand by for a moment, because we've just been given a statement by former President George Bush, which I'm going to read. Former President Bush says, "I have every confidence that the president will do the right thing. I know of the president's determination, of his personal strength, and of his confidence in his superb national security team. We must review the executive orders and laws that our intelligence agencies operate under with the goal of enhancing our human intelligence capabilities. Further, if we are to have the best human intelligence, sources and methods must be protected. We must guard against painting with such a broad brush that we cause innocent Arab Americans or Islamic believers anywhere to come under unfair attack. There will be a tendency in some quarters to lump in with the terrorists all those who believe in Islam. This we must strongly condemn. I hope God will continue to give our president the strength he and his team need to continue to lead us and the rest of the world in getting to the bottom of these terrorist attacks, and then in bringing the culprits to justice." Tim, is it likely that President George W. Bush is seeking some counsel from his father? After all, he was, you know, president during the Gulf War. He helped gather together, that had the very delicate job of gathering together and coalescing a lot of disparate countries in support of U.S. action in the Persian Gulf. What role do you think former President Bush may be playing?
Katie, ironically, former President Bush was in the White House on Tuesday morning when this attack occurred. He happened to be visiting there in town. He did not go to the Situation Room and become part of the negotiations or discussions, but he left the White House. But he is someone that the current president loves and respects, and those are two pretty good qualities to have in any advisor. During the situation when our plane was forced to land in China, former President Bush was an invaluable advisor. And I would think that this president will utilize his knowledge and his thoughts and his experiences, and I think most Americans would understand that, in fact, encourage it.
And it's interesting, Tim, that he emphasized the need of enhancing our human intelligence. That seems to be almost a national refrain from those in intelligence circles, starting with General Schwarzkopf in the hours shortly after these attacks.
And Katie, you put your finger on something. Right before that, when you read that statement, he talked about executive orders regarding intelligence and military operations. We have an executive order that bans assassinations. There is a lot of discussion in Washington about undoing that.
But although Senator Graham just told me, Tim, that really had been changed in terms of how it had been interpreted.
The case of Pablo Escobar, for example, Tim, when we trained people in Colombia to go after him and not bring him to justice, but assassinate him.
And more, I think you'll see a broader interpretation. This morning, Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts, someone who's thinking about running for President of the United States, said we should kill Osama bin Laden. There is a new reality in Washington and across this country.
All right, Tim Russert. Tim, thank you very much. As I mentioned, former President Bush said, and I'm just going to repeat this, we must guard against painting with such a broad brush that we cause innocent Arab Americans or Islamic believers anywhere to come under unfair attack. Those must be welcome words to Jim Zogby, because he's the president of the Arab American Institute in Washington, D.C., and he is concerned about the tensions building against the Arab American community in this country. Mr. Zogby, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Katie.
Have you, well, we appreciate your being here, and this is certainly an important point, and obviously so important that President Bush addressed it in his remarks. That must have been heartening.
They are welcome remarks, because We think the president himself should, and I believe he will. We have meetings today with the Justice Department, and I believe that they will as well. I saw Senator Lieberman yesterday who expressed his concern and will make public comments. Senator Ted Kennedy did yesterday, and John McCain did. There is a growing awareness, I think, that Arab Americans may, and in fact in some instances already have been victims of this. Listen, Arab Americans were working in the World Trade Center. We are firefighters and police officers in New York, and we had Arab Americans in the Pentagon when those terrorists struck. And so we are mourners and victims. The problem is that in many instances, people in our community have become so afraid of a public backlash that they can't mourn because they're looking over their shoulders. The man who drove me here today is a recent Arab immigrant who told me that he was pleased to have me in the car because with other passengers, he didn't want them to know where he's from. That kind of fear creates an enormous problem for people. When I was listening to the First Lady and she was talking about dealing with your sadness and seeing people and talking it through, understand the tremendous problem of Arab Americans who feel the sadness, who mourn like other Americans, but who are afraid to publicly deal with it because of the fear of backlash, and therefore who have almost a double pain in this circumstance.
We should mention, Jim, that there are 7 million Muslims living in the United States, law-abiding citizens who are productive members of our society.
Right, and 3.5 million Arab Americans. The president has 2 in his cabinet, and there are 6 in Congress. And my kids on college campuses and stories we've gotten already of 15-year-old boy beaten up in Los Angeles and fights in Dearborn, Michigan, and a kid attacked at a campus in North Carolina. These are things that shouldn't happen, but because of what your numbers were showing with Tim a moment ago, the pent-up anger is coming out. The problem is it's taking the form of a kind of bigotry that's no different than the bigotry that caused the violent attacks in the first place. It shouldn't be used against innocent Arab Americans.
And in fact, Jim, you witnessed some of this following the bombing of the World Trade Center back in February of 1993. Remind people what was so upsetting to Arab Americans then.
I was doing a television show that night. I do a weekly program, a live call-in show. Got a caller from Oklahoma City. His house was surrounded by people who were throwing stones and taunting and demonstrating to get out of town. We had a young man who was stopped by federal agents, and his life was ruined, actually. He and his wife separated. He has never recovered from that. And a couple of hundred instances in just the 24 hours when people thought an Arab did it. There were a couple hundred instances of people actually being targeted, beaten, stores attacked, etc. This shouldn't happen. This is not America. Arab Americans are part of our country, and we ought to protect. I think that we not turn into the kind of ugliness that I think these terrorists wanted to see us turn into.
But Jim, you also have to balance that with the need of law enforcement to conduct a proper investigation to find out who, in fact, might have been behind this. For example, there were people detained or brought in for questioning, excuse me, from a hotel in Boston because apparently there was a case of mistaken identity. They were then released. Obviously, some things like that are bound to happen. Would you agree?
In a careful investigation by law enforcement, there may be a mistake. That's one thing. But people simply striking out against somebody who's dark, has a mustache, or a beard, or a woman whose head is covered, that's not acceptable, and that's wrong. Law enforcement must do the job. Vigilantism must not occur.
Have you spoken with anyone within the government about your concerns so that somehow you can prevent future incidents?
We're meeting today with the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. My son works there, and we're thankful for the leadership that Ralph Boyd is showing. We're meeting as well with other officials at the Justice Department and at the State Department. We feel that there is a sensitivity to the concern. As I told you, Joe Lieberman, Senator Kennedy, Senator McCain, others have publicly spoken out about this. The president, I believe, should and I think will. His comments are very much appreciated. I think that there is an awareness that this is a problem. We hope that Americans will listen, and I believe that we're beginning actually an effort to go around the country to get local police departments and local mayors and city councils to also speak out about it so that we can deal with the problem of terrorism, stop those who have committed violence against our people, and not turn against each other in this moment of enormous sadness.
Jim Zogby of the Arab American Institute.
Thank you, Katie.
Jim, thanks a lot. Good to see you again.
Thanks.
This is a News 10 NBC special report. America Under Siege.
Good morning, I'm Gabe Dalmuth. We interrupt today's show's coverage to bring you local developments. If you're hoping to take a flight out of Rochester today, you should know there will be no movement until at least 11 this morning. Lynette Adams is live at the airport this morning with the latest. Lynette?
That's right, Gabe. The airport is still closed. However, the airport is expected to reopen. The airport is now awaiting certification from the Department of Transportation. That's expected to happen sometime this morning, at least by 11 o'clock. The county is recommending that people call their airlines to find out the specifics. The county is also recommending that once you find out when your flight will be taking off, to arrive at the airport at least 2 hours before that flight. The county is advising travelers to make sure that they have photo identification and also to have their baggage labeled properly and expect to have your baggage searched. We're told some flights may be ready to leave as early as 11 o'clock, but most airlines probably will not be flying until this afternoon and into the evening. Now, we expect to hear from the airport manager in about an hour or so, and of course, we will bring you an update as warranted. Reporting live from the Rochester International Airport, Lynette Adams, News 10 NBC.
Lynette, when we spoke to you an hour ago, you said there is absolutely no movement among any airline staffers or passengers. Has that changed at all?
Has not changed at all. It is still quiet here at the airport. We're not seeing workers, we're not seeing travelers, we're not seeing anyone at all, but we're told the airport will open as early as 11 o'clock this morning.
And obviously your reference to 2 hours before your flight and also be prepared to have your baggage searched and an identification, these are all the new security measures that we can all expect.
That's right.
To have in place from here on in.
That's right. The county is expecting it to take at least 2 hours to go through all of these security measures, having your baggage searched, having your identification checked. All that is expected to take quite a bit of time.
All right. Lynette Adams reporting for us live at the airport. Thank you. Local relief agencies, among them the Red Cross, are still asking for your help. The Red Cross says that despite the crush of people who had to be turned away yesterday, the Red Cross still needs blood donations. The problem yesterday was having enough people on hand to screen donors and to draw blood. Now let's show you the number to call for more information on what the Red Cross needs. Locally, 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. Rich Cornelia is in the 10 NBC Weather Lab. Drizzly day so far, Rich?
That's right, Gabe. We're having a bit of a cold front coming on through. It certainly sparked a few showers, even a quick downpour over the city. That moved quickly eastward earlier. Here's a live look. 10 NBC Weather Lab triple Dopplers are showing that pretty much from the thruway northward, 390 westward, things have quieted down substantially, but still some steady showers from Canandaigua eastward, routes 5 and 20. But this rain is moving to the east and the southeast, and upstream looks relatively quiet, albeit cloudy and cool through the afternoon. Right now, 61 degrees with the cloud cover, west-northwesterly winds at 7 down at the airport. And there's that cool front sliding on by. Going to take its time, so the clouds are going to hang tough today, and it will be that chilly breeze out of the north. Highs only low to mid-60s for the afternoon, with a couple of leftover quick showers possible. Tonight, more of the same cloud showers. 48 degrees. Friday, we'll see the return of a bit of sunshine. Highs to only upper 50s, low 60s. The weekend looks dry and sunny with temps in the mid-60s. Gabe?
All right, Rich, thank you very much. We will continue to bring you local developments throughout the day. Right now, back to NBC, The Today Show. Matt Lauer talking to people who were in the Pentagon when that plane came in.
Stood up in the Air Force, and we continued with our work at that time because that's what we need to do, and the professionals did their jobs.
Major Rodriguez, I know that you actually ran home and changed your clothes and then wanted to get back to the Pentagon to aid in the evacuation. Give me an idea of some of the things you experienced in those first few hours.
Disorientation for a while, trying to find familiar faces. It was like almost a nightmare. You're walking through crowds and seeing all these faces, but not the ones you want to see. And getting over to where the building was actually burning and having security people yell at you, run, the incoming plane, and people not knowing where to run. But they just headed away from the Pentagon. And it was just frightening and then angering because you couldn't figure out why this planned attack was allowed to happen, and you couldn't be there to stop it. You know, for a while, you just wanted to reach out and just help folks that were in the building.
There was an emotional moment yesterday, and I'd like one of you to try and describe the scene for me. There was a time yesterday when rescue workers brought out a damaged American flag.
Oh, awesome.
And put it just outside the Pentagon. Yeah. One of you, or all of you, tell me that story.
At some point, one of the firefighters brought out a flag that was broken. The pole was actually broken, and planted it in front of the door where they were entering the building to put the fire out. And the crowds, just all the rescue workers, medics, everyone just applauded. It was phenomenal. And we had a general who actually took the flag and gave it to another Marine colonel, and he carried the flag over to his Marines. And they went through an incredible ceremony of holding the flag, and we stood at attention and saluted and parted ways so that they could make their way back to a 3-star Army general, and they presented the flag to him. It was just the most incredible. It brought the crowd together. It was like, you haven't done anything to us. We're still standing.
It's hard to imagine, Captain Polensky, I mean, in the midst of this destruction and this debris and the people trying to save lives, for everyone to stop for a moment and begin to I guess, spontaneous applause for the American flag.
That's exactly right, sir, but I think that's indicative of the way the United States military operates, and as personally touching as it was for me, it wasn't in the least bit surprising.
What was it like yesterday, Captain Carter? I mean, the military wanted there to be the appearance that life would continue and that things could get back to normal quickly, and I know many of you actually reported to work yesterday, and you reported to work in a building that was still on fire.
Yes, sir. I mean, well, we showed up, those that could, to go ahead and do our jobs, and there's a lot to do. We need to respond to what's happened. We need to help the ones in there. And you went to work. I mean, there's a smell of smoke. Your eyes burnt at times, but there's a job to be done. And it was only when I was leaving the building that someone actually said, "I can't believe you know, that this has happened, and that we're in a building that is still on fire."
I'm sorry, Captain. Major Rodriguez, what would you like people watching to know about what's taken place at the Pentagon, and perhaps more importantly, the spirit that exists there now?
I think what I'd like them to know is that, you know, the folks inside that building right now have been pulling together. We're there for everyone, actually, both those who work in the building and people who call from outside, wanting to be a part. We had folks calling yesterday who want to join the military, aunts, uncles, everyone just wants to be a part of this. And I think it's just a phenomenal feeling of morale and camaraderie, and I think, and also patriotism.
Now, I know that all of our hearts and prayers go out to the families of the people who are still unaccounted for. Major Liz Rodriguez, Captain Liesl Carter, and Captain Tom Polensky, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, sir.
Here's Katie.
Thank you, Matt. Sir, outstanding group of young people. Another outstanding group, a heroic group, rescuers at the World Trade Center, who face a grim and difficult job today as they work around the clock searching for any signs of life. NBC's Soledad O'Brien was at the site late Wednesday, and she joins us this morning. Soledad, good morning.
And good morning to you, Katie. Right now, we're just about 6 blocks away from what's being called Ground Zero, and there's a series of checkpoints that have been set up to keep everybody out except for essential personnel. Obviously, as you get closer to the building, the smoke is thicker, the air is more difficult to breathe. As you mentioned, we went in to talk to some of the rescuers. Some of them have been on the job now for 46+ hours. They are exhausted, but they're not giving up. Escorted by paramedics, we carry just a digital video camera and a small disposable camera. The first thing we see, what remains of the North Tower. It's where firefighters initially responded to a plane crash. It became much more. A pedestrian bridge blown apart, burnt out emergency vehicles. Today's fire crews in a futile attempt to put out the rest of the burning shell of the tower, knowing that those first rescuers on the scene, hundreds of them, lay trapped somewhere inside. A block south, we come upon the other tower and an army of firefighters, police officers, National Guardsmen, and volunteers. It is a monumental effort on a mountain of steel and glass and pulverized concrete. They pass pieces of the building's skeleton, hand over hand in a human chain, collecting evidence in a crime scene 3 blocks wide. We see trauma surgeons, EMTs, and paramedics, but they're standing, waiting on the edge of the disaster. There are few rescues and so nothing to do. Instead, just grim discoveries, body parts instead of bodies. To us, the amount of work that lies ahead is overwhelming, and the danger still very real. The heaps of debris are smoldering, surrounding buildings are badly damaged or gutted, and possibly unstable. And yet, many rescuers tell us this is personal. They're looking for their friends, their colleagues, and in some cases, members of their own family. One officer called to duty minutes after the South Tower was hit told me that his brother, one of the first firefighters to respond, has not been heard from since. And that officer says he's going to stay on the spot where his brother was last seen. It really is a heartbreaking story. Many of the comrades, obviously firefighters, EMTs, and police officers, hopeful that they'll be able to at some point be called in to rescue their fallen brothers and sisters. But at this time, it looks a little bit hopeless. Katie, back to you.
Oh, so many sad, sad stories, Soledad. Thank you so much. American airspace is scheduled to reopen at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, at least on a limited basis. NBC's Robert Hager is at Washington's Ronald Reagan National Airport this morning. Bob, what can you tell us?
Limited is the operative word, Katie, because what this really is sort of a formal declaration that the skies are open again. But the FAA is saying that each airport has to convince the agency that it's ready to put the new and tougher security measures into practice before they can open. But already about 100 airports around the country have convinced the FAA that they can do that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's all major airports, because many of those 100 airports are smaller airports. All right, well, that's what's on paper. But I think, too, this 11 o'clock hour, which is 11 o'clock Eastern, but ripples across the country, so it'll be 3 hours earlier on the Pacific coast, that's going to take airlines more time to get ready, I think. So passengers should be sure to check airlines before they come to the airport, because I think it's going to take much more than that to get things back in order where people get flying again.
Bob?
And here at Reagan National, by the way, they're not going to open at all until much later on today, maybe tonight or maybe even tomorrow. But that's a particular case because it's Washington. Katie?
Bob, do international flights have priority or domestic flights? Isn't there some kind of rundown when they reopen air travel?
No, I think it'll be across the board. It's just wherever the airlines are ready to send them off. But again, passengers, they really need to check their airline, because I believe that this is going to take many hours to get back up, and particularly to get the aircraft where they need to be to make scheduled flights.
Right, I was going to say, Bob,
a big breakthrough at 11 o'clock Eastern.
I was going to say, so much of the fleets or so many planes are not positioned properly this morning, so they're going to have to really scramble, and it's probably a massive undertaking, isn't it?
It is. They're scattered all over the country, because even when you have a snowstorm in the wintertime and it affects one region and the planes are scattered out enough there that it takes them 2 or 3 days to get back to normal, well, here you have an entire country sort of like that. The airlines did have a permission to begin repositioning a few planes, but really they didn't get much of that done overnight. And so, again, it'll take hours to begin to create some semblance of order. And then as far as a particular plane meeting a particular schedule, don't count on it.
All right. Everybody needs to have a lot of patience in the upcoming days. Bob Hager. Bob, thank you very much.
Surely, Katie.
With air travel in this country virtually paralyzed today, travelers are trying to find any way they can to get to their destinations. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is outside Chicago's O'Hare Airport this morning. Kelly, good morning.
Good morning, Katie. With the government now setting a new time to reopen the skies, we're beginning to see just the first indications that air travel here at O'Hare may be ready to restart. We've seen some ground activity with some of the vehicles here with their lights and sirens moving about the aircraft, also seeing some aircraft moving from hangars. Nothing more significant than that at this point. We know that there have been only airport personnel allowed into O'Hare this morning. That's been the same now for a couple of days. And here at Chicago's O'Hare, typically you'd have 200,000 people moving in and out on a typical day. But for now, this is just a ghost town under heavy guard.
America, another day in the no-fly zone.
I've been flying 11 years and never thought about it once. But now, you know, maybe I will drive 5 hours if I have to.
Plan B for many stranded travelers making the trip by rental car. One-way rentals up. Melanie Davidson on the road today. A 17-hour drive from Green Bay home to Atlanta.
When we heard that things were pretty much not going to be going until Friday or the weekend, we decided to take off and start driving.
Much too far to drive, stuck in Alaska. Air passengers once headed to Asia diverted to Anchorage. Waiting to come home, the attack even keeping some travelers outside the U.S. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, a makeshift hotel. Keep out signs at U.S. airports. Sacramento turning passengers away.
And we're still awaiting word from the Secretary of Transportation as to when the airspace will reopen.
Chicago's O'Hare, hardly the busiest airport now. Lines to fill up, easing up. Prices at the pump spiked and fell. Fears over limited supply and price gouging.
There's no need for people to run out and try to hoard gasoline or to buy up extra gasoline. Everything should be back to normal.
Not at all normal. Heightened security at a Chicago post office. Vehicle searches under a building that processes 3 to 4 million pieces of mail a day. Nationwide, 210,000 trucks make up for airmail that still can't fly.
When we have bad weather and everything, and the planes are grounded and airports are closed, we have to do the same exact thing.
Delivering more muscle, military security on alert at bases like Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. What many now consider a war effort, even encouraging new recruits.
I didn't think that people would come in the droves that we have in the last 2 days.
An ugly battle line forming at home. Some mosques and Arab Americans targeted in several cities. Bullets fly at an Islamic center in Texas.
We are not afraid.
That hate renewing calls for civility. Reverend Jesse Jackson urging anger not be used to justify discrimination.
We must not turn on each other.
Around the country, steps in a return to routine. St. Louis reopens the famed Arch. Visitors return to the nation's tallest building, Chicago's Sears Tower. The events of this week reopening something else, a feeling of patriotism. One expression, flags. A run on the Stars and Stripes at Walmart stores.
We're going to be getting some more in a couple days.
A typical day selling 6,000 flags. But since the strike on the U.S., a surge in demand. 113,000 American flags and counting.
You've heard a lot about blood donation. Well, organ donation has also been affected. Some of the organizations that I called said they've been forced to drive organs to waiting donors when they would have used helicopters or aircraft. They've been asked to try to find donors in local areas. So that's one of the unexpected ways that this shutdown of the skies has affected some people. Here at O'Hare, we've seen a Continental jet moving what appears to be toward a gate. We don't know for sure. I know I've been checking on my own flight back home to New York, and they're telling me I can't leave Chicago until 4 o'clock this afternoon. Katie?
All right, NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, thank you so much. It is coming up on 8:59 now. Here's Matt.
If, Katie, there's a positive side to this, New Yorkers have been volunteering by the thousands to donate blood. Some people waiting in lines for up to 8 hours to do so. But now people are being asked to wait until more is known about possible survivors from the World Trade Center. Dr. Robert Jones is president of the New York Blood Center. Dr. Jones, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
It appears that people were not prepared for how many others were going to be trying to donate blood.
Matt, we've had a wonderful response. In the first 24 hours, we had over 5,000 donations. That's approximately 3 times what we'd ordinarily have. We did send out 600 units to the 6 receiving hospitals. And since then, we've had very little need from the hospitals. So now we're trying to get a message to the wonderful people who are coming forward, not to donate today or tomorrow, but next week and the week after, so we can sustain this blood supply as we see what the medical care need will be over the next few weeks. And in fact, maybe we'll have to prepare for something in the future, unfortunately.
So basically, some of these collection centers or donation centers are maxed out. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, I think around the country, we've experienced, as I understand from my colleagues, an overwhelming response from the public to donate blood. I think it's being closest to ground zero here. We've had an unbelievable response, one that is really heartwarming, and we've been working very, very closely with people here. We've trained over 200 or 300 volunteers to do new collections, people who have not done this before, in order to take care of this incredible response. We're now telling people, because our supplies are so large and the medical care need seems to be taken care of at the moment, we're telling people, asking people to come back next week. We're taking lots of names and telephone numbers, asking them to come back next week, the week after. It's very important that we sustain a national blood supply.
But what about specific types of blood, doctor? Are there any types that you definitely need now as opposed to later?
Well, we, in the first day seeing the response, we began to triage or prioritize type O and Rh negative donors. We now have only those people in our lines. If you see behind me, we still have long lines. We're asking those people, as we take their names, to come back next week. Our supplies are very, very abundant right now across the whole metropolitan area. I think across the nation, even the world. We've had offers from around the world to ship blood to us.
All right, and again, if people want to know more about how and when they can donate blood, the America's Blood Centers, there's a number, 1-888-BLOOD-88. Again, 1-888-BLOOD-88. Doctor, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt. Give blood, save a neighbor.
Absolutely. Total of 350 firefighters are unaccounted for after Tuesday's attack on the World Trade Center, the most devastating loss of rescuers to date. Harold Schadberger is president of the International Union of Firefighters. Harold, good morning.
Good morning.
The last time we spoke was unfortunately another tragic event, the terrible fire in Worcester, Massachusetts, that claimed the lives of 6 firefighters, but the numbers here are staggering.
They are staggering. Nothing prepares you for this. In our business, you know, our members are trained to deal with tragedy, trauma. We know that there's a sacrifice that can be made. We were just here in New York when we lost 3 of our members on Father's Day. But nothing can prepare you for the magnitude of this catastrophic loss, both in civilian lives as well as what is going to turn out to be the loss of our members here in this city.
You say nothing can prepare you, but is this something that there has been a fear of for a long time, a major disaster and a first response team going in, followed by secondary disasters?
We have been preparing, and we understand that terrorism was a matter of time. Catastrophic events were inevitable. We've been trying to work with the departments around this country, but particularly with our federal government, to get them to focus on some additional attention and resources that are needed to help prepare our nation's firefighters for the inevitable terrorist attack. And as absolutely horrific as this event was here in New York, if there's anything that can be culled out of it, that is simply thank God that we did not have any biological or chemical agents involved. We've been trying to get the government to focus on the need of first responders. The nation and the world watched New York's bravest respond within minutes, and they did an extraordinary job and continue to do it around the clock. But the fact is that we need the additional attention and resources to be prepared for future events.
When we talk about first responders, what we're talking about in real terms is men and women who arrive at the scene of something like the first impact of that jetliner in the World Trade Center. They don't stay at their trucks. They go inside that burning building, in many cases using stairs to climb up as high as they can go and try and rescue the people who are in danger from the flames. And it's those people, those brave men and women, who then fall victim when that building collapses.
There's only one way to do the job that our members do for the public. You have to go in. Those stairwells were unfortunately filled with New York firefighters doing their job. They were working on search and rescue. They were working on evacuating civilians. They were working on initiating an attack on that fire. That's the only place you can do it, is inside.
Was there any thought, I mean, was there a chance to get any of those men and women out, fearing that the building would collapse? I read some information the other day that the building was designed to withstand an hour or 2 of flames, but that the jet fuel, in this particular case, made those flames so intense that the metal simply buckled. Was there any idea that this was going to happen so quickly?
I don't think anybody could have even remotely imagined that those 2 towers would ever come down as the world watched 48 hours ago.
I know you met with the firefighters' unions in New York. You made some important decisions last night. Tell me a little bit about those.
Well, we have to be prepared to handle the loss of our members, their families, but our members themselves. We are right now pulling together a number of critical incident stress teams from around the country to be prepared to come in here and debrief and work with our members who are under unbelievable stress right now. And the aftermath of this is going to last for months and years and lifetimes to come. We are pulling together grief counselors that are experienced within our business to be prepared to work with the loved ones of our members who ultimately will be lost. We are also pulling together a memorial fund that will be the New York Firefighters 9-111 Disaster Relief Fund. We're going to end up with 1,000 or more children without fathers. We're going to have families devastated. We want to be able to help pull together the resources to help them over the course of months and years. And I would just say this, that any of your viewing public that wants to provide any assistance, if they would go online to www.iff.org, and they will find the site. I would just caution that there'll be a lot of good intentions, and there'll be a lot of honorable funds that will be developed to respond to this need. But I would also caution the public that there will unfortunately be, I'm afraid, some funds that may not be as honorable. This is the New York City Firefighters Union fund that will go for those families.
You say make sure that if you have an open heart and you're willing to donate, make sure that it goes to the right cause.
Yes.
I should mention that I know General Electric, the parent company of NBC, has donated $10 million to help the families of the emergency workers, firefighters, and police. Cisco, I understand, has donated $4 million. I'm sure other corporations will follow suit. I would like you to just talk a second, Harold, about something that we saw in Worcester, Massachusetts, and something that we're seeing here in New York City, and that is immediately after the word gets out that firefighters have been killed, are in danger while doing their job, firefighters from all around the country get in their cars, jump in fire trucks, and head to the affected area. I just want you to explain a little bit about why you think that happens.
Well, you have to be in the business to understand it. If you're not in our business, it's very hard to explain. You're dealing with people who, this is first of all their second family. They live with these men and women that they work with. They sleep in the same place. They cook and eat meals together. And they're in battle together. They're in their own combat daily. Their lives are in each other's hands, and they depend on each other for their own safety. It's a unique bond that's very, very difficult to explain. And when one of our members go down, every firefighter in this nation understands what that means. And they want to respond. They want to help. Whether it's coming to the site to try to actually provide help, or whether it's later when we are going to do a national memorial service, as we did in Worcester. And our international union put that together to honor those men. This is a time when you will see in this city probably not only tens of thousands, but maybe 100,000 firefighters come, their hearts breaking, to try to honor those that have been lost.
Harold Schaitberger, the president of the International Union of Firefighters. Harold, someday I hope we get to talk under better circumstances.
I certainly hope so, Matt.
Thanks very much for your help. Katie?
Thank you, Matt. It's hard enough for adults to cope with the devastation from these terrorist attacks. For children, it's even worse. NBC's George Lewis is in Los Angeles this morning with more on that story. Good morning, George.
Good morning, Katie. The question is, how do you explain a horrible act of terrorism to young children? That's what parents and teachers have been trying to cope with ever since those first reports of jetliners falling out of the sky.
In Oklahoma City, where they're all too familiar with terrorism, in the years since the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building, young students collected teddy bears to send to the victims of this latest outrage.
I would tell them that the people in Oklahoma care for them and that we've experienced the same thing that they have, except theirs was worse. Just to know that God's with them and that everyone else that heard about it cares for them.
In Salt Lake City, they put up all sorts of American flags.
I want to be able to do something to say, I'm proud to be an American.
And in El Paso, they brought out the yellow ribbons.
Comfort all who mourn.
In some private and church-run schools, the students said prayers for the victims of the terror attacks. And in classrooms all across the country, they talked about the horrible history-making events of this week.
When my grandpa talks about where he was the day of Pearl Harbor, I think now I'm going to be talking about where I was the day of the New York terrorism attack.
So many families were hurt. Think of all the moms and dads that their kids are orphans now. Like, people are really hurt now.
In St. Paul, Minnesota, middle school student Louis West poured out his feelings shared by many others, in a poem he wrote called Ash.
Early on a morning bright, another busy day. Who knew that things would end like this in such a tragic way? A nation brought unto its knees when caught so unaware. The carnage felt by everyone is difficult to bear. But amid the death, smoke, and debris, and through our country's fear, our light of hope burns through the haze, and liberty rings clear. For through this greatest travesty, our nation has been proved. United under God and state, America is moved. Moved to look beyond the loss, past teardrops in our eyes. Our country has been beaten down, but through the dust we'll rise.
Words of sadness, words of hope, words of patriotism from a young man. Feelings shared by kids across this country. Katie?
George Lewis in Los Angeles. George, thank you very much. The enormity of this attack, as George mentioned, is overwhelming, and many parents are wondering now about how to talk to their kids about these tragic events. Psychiatrist Dr. Harold Koplowitz is director of the New York University Child Study Center. Harold, good morning.
Good morning.
You know, we talked about this with Mrs. Bush a little while ago and about how concerned parents are. But before we talk about all kids, let's focus on the ones who are most affected, the ones who have lost relatives, mothers, fathers, in this terrible tragedy, because you think of the sheer enormity of the numbers, 266 on that plane, thousands in the World Trade Center, hundreds at the Pentagon. I mean, it's just so overwhelming, and the ripple effect of all the families that are affected by individual losses is just staggering.
I think that's the first thing you have to do as a parent, is try to assess how much risk your child has. And clearly, if your child is one whose parent is lost right now, or who's been injured, or if you were one of the students who were downtown in one of those schools that had to be evacuated, these kids are more at risk. And so you're going to see real anxiety symptoms and tremendous amount of difficulty sleeping and weeping and mourning and grief. But you're absolutely right. There is a ripple effect, because it becomes separation by two degrees of separation. If it's not someone you know, then it's somebody that somebody knows.
Right,
and
or
so
it's maybe a child whose classmate lost a father, and it goes on and on and on. But for those most seriously affected, I don't think we can emphasize enough the importance of getting counseling for these kids.
And not only counseling now, but counseling in the future as well. For them, they need the support of their community. They need people to reach out to them, because it's worse in some ways than a normal death, because that has a finality to it. Here, we don't know where these people are. There isn't a body. There isn't a funeral yet. There isn't a ritual for you to participate in. And so for those families, really, you have to surround them as a community.
And I think that's such a good point, Harold, because I think sometimes people want to give people their privacy, or they want to stay away, and they don't want to be intrusive. Yet at a time like this is when families really need the support of their churches, their synagogues, community groups, school groups, to actually intervene and say,
we're here,
and we want to help. And in fact, here are places you can go to get help. Here are numbers of people who specialize in counseling children, because that's sort of the last thing you have time to deal with. I know from my own experience that I would have so welcomed somebody helping me with that, instead of me having to proactively get out there and find the resources myself.
We spent the last 24 hours at the Child Study Center compiling a guide for parents and a guide for teachers, particularly focusing on New York City, but also using a guide that other school districts can use, and put it on our website so that everyone can download it. But it's amazing to me how we need to have this kind of resource ready ahead of time. We need a fire drill for any kind of tragedy, but this one is extraordinary. This one's of historic proportions. You know, we'll never forget this day, and unfortunately, we'll never go back to normal. It's never going to be the same. But what you have to remember for our kids, by the way, is we have to protect them. Children under the age of 6 shouldn't really be watching television. This is a time where if your kid is at home,
unless it's Nickelodeon or something that's harmless.
Or put a video in and monitor what they're watching. And if they're over 6 to the age of 12, it should be very, very limited. You know, you're doing a great job here, but still, a few minutes maybe in the morning, sitting with them and trying to explain to them what's going on. But watching some of the material that's been on this morning, for instance, the heartache that these people were describing whose brother was in the plane, becomes so traumatizing that as adults we sit there and get tearful. And so you can understand that for young children this becomes a trauma unto itself, and so it's not good for them.
I've actually been surprised that some of my friends are kind of having wall-to-wall coverage in their house and
it's on constantly.
not keeping it away from their kids, because it is so upsetting for the adults, and for the children it is also upsetting. So that's, well, let's talk about concrete advice,
Sure.
Harold. So no television, possibly, if it can be avoided, and frankly it can be avoided.
Absolutely, and if it isn't going to be avoided, then it has to be limited, an hour, and you watch with your child. What you have to watch out for teenagers, by the way, is this nonchalant attitude, and also this killer attitude. Oh, let's kill them, let's flatten Afghanistan, let's get all the Arabs, and that lack of tolerance, because they're so hateful now, they're so scared,
and that's not just teenagers, by the way.
But you see it a lot with adolescents. This is a time for parents to talk about tolerance. This craziness, this event occurred because of insane behavior. This hatred, which for people who don't know us even, they attacked us. So we really have to make sure that this is a time for talking to your kids. But also kids need to be active. You have to give them projects. And it's funny, you talked about the Red Cross. The Red Cross doesn't need kids. They're too young to give blood. There's no bandages to make. It's not that kind of war. So we came up with some ideas, drawing pictures, poetry, which you just heard.
Writing thank you notes to firefighters and police officers and EMS workers.
But instead of a red ribbon for AIDS or a yellow ribbon like when we had hostages, we suggested to kids, and my son started making them friendship bracelets of red, white, and blue, not only to remember the fireworkers and the policemen, but also to say we're strong. You know, New York will survive, America will survive, we're in this together, because feeling alone really makes people very anxious, and you want to give kids something that they can do.
I think the problem that has surfaced in my family the most, particularly with my 10-year-old, is this overwhelming feeling of vulnerability. Mom, are they going to bomb us? How do you know? Why not? Somebody made the wrong call. We got a wrong number sort of in the middle of the night, and Ellie was sleeping with me because she was nervous. And she said, was that a hostage call? I mean, just the level of anxiety in children is incredible.
But this is perfect, because Ellie is telling us what lots of other kids feel. First of all, it's very personal. You know, are we going to be able to go on a plane at Christmas to see Grandma?
Well, she's already decided we're never going on a plane again.
Right,
so.
But, you know, are we going to school? Is school safe? And this is what parents have to tell their kids. Yes, school is safe. Yes, our airplanes weren't safe enough. We're going to make them much more safe. We have a very strong country. We have a government that we believe in. They're going to get the bad guys, and these are bad guys. There's no ambiguity about it. We're the good guys right now, and we're going to protect you. And staying calm and giving them concrete solutions are very reassuring.
I told her yesterday, we're walking on the street, and she said, well, how could this happen, and what's going to happen to the people who did it? I said, America is an incredibly, strong country. I think America is the strongest country in the world, and we're going to take quick and decisive action and hopefully find the people responsible for this so they won't be able to do it again. But of course, Harold, there's no guarantee of that.
Absolutely. But for right now, by the way, the school is safe. And right now, we are going to have safer airplanes. But, Ellie's very talkative. There are a whole bunch of kids out there who don't talk, and parents are going to be deceived by them and not say anything to them. This is a topic parents have to bring up no matter how young a child is, because it's such a catastrophic event. So you have to put it into language they understand. You don't have to force feed it to them, but you have to say, we've been attacked, it was very dangerous, and now we're going to have protection.
Even kids say between the ages of like 4 and 6, do you really have to do that? Because gosh, talk about destroying all innocence. They don't even know what attack means.
Well, the reason why you have to do it is they're going to hear about it from someone else. This is not, you can't protect children under the age of 6 from not hearing about this at all. And I'd rather parents talk to their children about that. They're very upset that many people were killed. It's been a terrible event in our country, but now we're going to take action. And so to not discuss it, especially when it's on television, when it's in the news, and when everyone else is talking about it, kids need a safe place to talk. So they need to know that their parents are available even if they only want to talk about it a little bit, or even if they just want to draw a picture about it, or even if they're just going to do a bracelet. It's okay, it's safe, I'm here to discuss it with you.
You know, sometimes people say the best time to talk to kids is right before they go to bed. But this might not be the time to raise it right before they go to bed.
Exactly.
Instead, you might, as Mrs. Bush suggested, read a story to your child, cuddle with your child, talk to your child.
Mrs. Bush is right on target. She, you know, she talks about the soothing voice of a mother and her mother. She's right on target. It's a good time for rituals, to get back into routine, a bedtime story, getting back to school. Schools have to be prepared for these kids. But the more kids get into a routine and have a calm parent, that brings back normalcy.
And we should also just remind people that, you know, it's not a matter of a couple of days. You might see indications in your child that he or she is troubled by this or greatly disturbed in weeks, even months to come.
Right.
So people need to really stay on top of their kids and continue to check in with them and keep the lines of communication open.
And to remember what the baseline is, what your kids are like, how active they are, how isolated they usually are, and keep watching and monitoring, because you're absolutely right. This is a sleeper. You're going to see more symptoms in 72 hours, even more in 2 weeks, and even more in 4 weeks.
It's an unbelievably difficult situation that I think we've never witnessed before in our lives.
And it certainly then gives us a challenge as a parent to try to explain this and put this into some kind of words and reality for our children.
All right, Harold Koplowitz. Harold, thanks so much for coming in with those suggestions. For more information on this subject, you can log on to our website, and that, of course, is today.msnbc.com. It is 9:22. Once again, here's Matt.
Katie, as we've been telling you, investigators have started to track down the thousands of leads across the country already pouring in. In the last couple of days, they've searched a number of homes and businesses in Florida. NBC's Kerry Sanders is in Miami with more on that. Kerry?
Well, the FBI, and I'm outside their headquarters right now, are focusing on 5 Florida men, all with Middle Eastern sounding names, all, it's believed, who died in the hijackings.
33-year-old Mohammed Atta, believed to be one of the suicide pilots, trained to fly right here in the United States, attending this flight school in Venice, Florida, with his younger cousin Marwan al-Shahi, both in school here for 7 months last year, flying this twin-engine Seneca for their commercial pilot's licenses. NBC News has learned they each received FAA commercial pilot's licenses December 21st last year. The designated pilot examiner who tested Atta and his cousin saying neither stands out in his memory.
They were just average people. If there had been anything in particular, I'm sure I would have remembered it, but they were just 2 more pilots that went through.
Flight school owner Rudy Deckers saying 60% of his students are foreigners.
Like everybody else, I'm absolutely shocked.
Ali Azan from Oman, a fellow student pilot, remembers Atta saying he was from Egypt, his cousin from the United Arab Emirates, both men keeping to themselves.
I tried to invite them a lot of times to come out with us, and that did not.
FBI agents in Vero Beach, Florida, serving search warrants on a location where other suspected suicide pilots may have once lived. In Hollywood, Florida overnight, investigators using infrared and ultraviolet lights to find fingerprints and other clues at a house where it's believed Atta rented a room. A similar scene in Hamburg, Germany, where both Atta and his cousin once had an apartment. Police there sealing the neighborhood, then taking a woman into custody for questioning. But where do all the clues lead investigators, like this car rented by al-Shahi, now at FBI headquarters in Miami? Agents found an address in the glove box that took them to a post office box at a mailboxes, etc. 40 miles away. That box in yet another man's name.
And the authorities now wanting to know who that man is, trying to locate him, to talk to him. The investigators not only want to find the evidence that they're boxing up, but what that evidence will lead them to in some sort of, where was the finances coming for all of this? Where was the money coming from? One of the records that they found that we also have a copy of is a car rental agreement that Mohammed Atta was able to do just last month, and he used a Visa card. So the authorities right over here, the FBI, have that information. They're looking at it, and they're trying to find out where the money was coming from, and does it point back to anybody in particular, Osama bin Laden, or where was the money coming from? Matt?
All right, Kerry, thank you very much. As in so many cases, the authorities are trying to follow the money. As Kerry just mentioned, 2 suspected terrorists involved with Tuesday's attacks were enrolled as students at the Huffman Aviation Flight School in Florida. Wednesday, FBI agents carted away between 8 and 10 boxes of records from that school. This morning, its president, Rudy Deckers, is at the school. Mr. Deckers, good morning to you.
Good morning, sir.
Give me an idea of exactly what was in the boxes that the FBI took away.
The FBI came here 2:30 a.m., talked to my general manager. They wanted 2 files. We indicated that we do more students from Europe, more from the Middle East, and we told them you can take all the files, and so they did. We gave them all the files we have from the last couple of years from all the students we passed through our facility.
So what you're saying is that the FBI seemed to be interested not only in these 2 men, Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi, but perhaps some other students as well?
No, they came for the 2 students. All we tried to do is help the authorities with as much as possible information to help the authorities to find these bastards.
Well, tell me a little bit about these 2 students, the ones who have been identified as students at your flight school. What can you remember about them? What contact did you have with them?
The only contact I had with them when they already were at my flight school for a couple of weeks. When I see faces a few times, I intend to talk to them for a couple of minutes just to socialize a little bit. I met them in the hallway, talked to them. I talked to Atta a few times. I didn't like the person. Why? I just didn't like him. No explanation. I talked to the other guy, I believe Hashimi, the bigger guy. He was a likable person like you see every day, and that was the only contact I had. I did talk to them about where you're from, what are your plans in life, and they indicated to us that they wanted to fly big airplanes back home. They indicated to us also when they came into the front door in Venice that they came from another flight school and they were not happy at that flight school and they wanted to finish the training with us.
Yeah, one of the other students at your school has said already that he tried to socialize with them on a number of occasions and they seemed to stick to themselves. How many hours did they actually log in training before they got their certificates?
That had to be around 250 hours because that's the minimum requirement you need for the for the commercial license. The commercial license they obtained here is the plane you can probably see behind me. That is the heaviest equipment we have here as Huffman Aviation, and as you can see, that is nothing compared to the planes that they hijacked. Also, to my knowledge yesterday from the media is that after they left my school here, November, December, they left to Pompano Beach and did some jet training over there because we're not capable to give them any jet training.
Yeah, there have been so many questions in the last 24 hours, Mr. Deckers, about, would the training they received on that plane you talk about behind you have qualified them or made them able to guide a 757 or 767 jetliner?
Well, in my opinion, not. But I'm not professional in the big airplanes, only in the small stuff. I have asked several captains, is it possible? And they said, well, we don't think it's possible. They had to, they changed direction, they changed altitude, they had to know knowledge about the avionics equipment to change the pilot, autopilot. In my opinion, not, but I'm not a professional in the big planes. Although, does it matter? We have found out yesterday that they went to another school to obtain more instructions or basic instructions on the jet lines. They only had here the small stuff.
And obviously they had access to flight manuals, some of which have been found, and unfortunately the cold hard truth is they didn't have to know how to take off or land these jets. They only needed to be able to steer them somewhat and to hit their targets. I know you mentioned you had about 60% of your students are foreigners, so there would have been no immediate reason to suspect these people, and that would be a dangerous assumption anyway. But have you asked yourself 100 times in the last day or so, did you miss a sign of some kind?
7 o'clock yesterday morning, I asked myself, could I? Was there anything? I asked all my employees because I don't have too much regular contact with the customers. I asked my instructors who instruct them for 4 months. There was no socializing. They never talked about religion, not even talked about girls. I mean, 2 subjects are always hot in the aviation industry. It's aviation and girls. They never socialized. They never talked. They were by themselves, and there's nothing. And of course, we ask ourselves here, as the group of people, could we? No, no. They came into the front door. We did not help them with any visa. They were in the United States. There was a licensed issue from the government to get into the country through another school or through another organization. We did ask their copies of their passports. I can't recall 2 of them where they came from. There was in the file. The FBI was extremely happy that we had copies of their passports, and that's all we could do. They behaved normal, as Dave Whitman said, the designated examiner from the FAA. They behaved normal. They were average people, and that's it. They left in November, December. We don't keep a track of all the students who come over here, and they left out of our eyesight. Till yesterday, of course.
Might you be more skeptical of new students in the future, which I guess would be a kind of a sad thing if that happens?
Well, of course we have to think about what are the rules and regulations, what's the government doing on this. We have sometimes, I own 2 flight schools, one down in Naples, and we do a lot of foreigners there too. We also have sometimes refused visas for these students due to the fact that the government don't want to let them come in. And then, well, of course, that is logical. If they don't want them, fine. My feeling is right now, if we have people coming from the Middle East, if they are still allowed to come back into this country, what we will do is send the file to the local FBI, just fax them the information. At least we gave them then the file of if we have a suspicion. We have a natural act in this, and that's we're going to suspect everybody from this area in the world to be the bad boys.
It's unfortunately certainly changed the mindset of a lot of people, and we would
Absolutely.
hope, as we've mentioned several times, that people don't unfairly assume or target people from that part of the world or from that religion. That certainly would be a terrible outcome of all this. Rudy Deckers, Mr. Deckers, thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
All right, Katie?
Matt, federal authorities say that the hijackers were followers of Islamic militant Osama bin Laden, who is reported to have strong family ties in Boston, where heavily armed FBI agents stormed the Westin Hotel on Wednesday. NBC's Chris Hansen has more on that story. Chris?
Good morning, Katie. NBC News has now confirmed reports here in Boston that a ramp pass was found in a rental car here at Logan Airport that has been linked to 2 of the hijacked suspects. Now, a ramp pass, as its name suggests, is a pass that gives someone access to restricted areas of the airport. Now, this indicates 2 things. 1, that the suspects were casing out the airport in the days before the hijacking, and 2, as we reported yesterday, that perhaps the hijacked suspects had inside help here at the airport, and that's why it's been a focus of this investigation. Investigators now believe they've identified all of the hijackers, but they still believe there may be as many as another 40 suspects involved. Wednesday in Boston, rapid-fire developments as the long arm of the law reached out across town trying to grab those responsible and those who might know anything about the plot. At the Westin Copley Plaza Hotel, 3 people were detained. The hotel was evacuated as a precaution. The bomb squad was brought in just in case. But by late evening, the 3 people were released. Investigators now say they had nothing to do with the terrorist attack. At another hotel in Boston, police and FBI agents confiscate a car, as well as what appeared to be a 767 flight manual. Cab drivers as well as baggage handlers at the airport are questioned by FBI agents. Did they have ties to the hijackers? Did the terrorists have inside help? FBI sources tell NBC they've felt for some time there's been a terrorist cell in the Boston area with direct ties to Osama bin Laden. Harvard terrorism expert Jessica Stern believes its members have been planning the horrific hijackings possibly for years.
This operation clearly required a great deal of advanced planning. The group knew that a good time to strike was when Americans had come back to work after Labor Day, when Congress was back in session. They knew that they were going to get a tremendous amount of attention. They had to think about that.
The first big break in the case came here in Boston after police are led to a rental car just like this one in a parking garage at Logan Airport. Sources link it to 2 brothers, one an experienced pilot, both with passports from the United Arab Emirates. Inside the car, they find flight instruction manuals in Arabic. 2 more hijackers are believed to have entered this country from Canada and flew to Boston Tuesday morning from Portland, Maine. And federal sources say one of their bags didn't make the transfer to one of the ill-fated flights. Inside, a video training tape for flying commercial jets, a copy of the Koran, and a fuel calculator.
I can assure you that absolutely everything will be done to identify and bring the perpetrators to justice.
Airport authorities defended their security practices, but admitted they'll be taking aggressive measures when Logan reopens. It is still not clear exactly when Logan Airport will reopen. There may be some limited flights today, but there are still a number of security questions here, including why it didn't raise suspicion when some of the hijackers, virtually at the last minute, bought one-way tickets and were able to board the plane with nobody apparently asking any questions. Katie?
But Chris, it's your understanding, and I guess John Ashcroft said this earlier, that the names of all the hijackers on each plane are known now?
Virtually all of them. I mean, they have the manifest. They've been able to match them up. As the Attorney General said, they believe that between 3 and 6 hijackers were on board each plane for a total of perhaps 20 to 22. They're still going over those lists, and there's no guarantees that they haven't missed somebody, but they think they have a pretty good handle on it. Yes, Kelly?
And I also understand, Chris, that Osama bin Laden's brother lives in Boston. Is that right?
That's true, Katie. In fact, he has, we are told, donated large sums of money to Harvard College here. The press spokesman for the family maintains, as well as Harvard maintains, that there is no real link between the brother and the terrorist Osama bin Laden, except for blood.
I was going to say, it's certainly curious, though, isn't it?
Well, it is, and there's also another relative here, Katie, who owns 6 luxury condominiums not far from here. There are other connections amongst people who have lived here. There are people who have been known to federal investigators for some time, people with suspected ties to groups in the Middle East. In fact, I'm told by federal investigators that there's been monitoring for the last couple of years here and in other places across the country. Some of these suspects have been known to federal authorities, but have not really done anything to be arrested or detained in the past.
And certainly their activities have not been carefully tracked, obviously. Well, NBC's Chris Hansen in Boston. Chris, thank you very much. It is 9:37. Now here's Matt.
Katie, downtown Manhattan looks like a war zone this morning as rescuers dig through the rubble, hoping upon hope to find someone alive. Ann Curry's downtown keeping tabs on the rescue efforts. Ann, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Matt. Listen, you know, because in part of the unstable situation here, we of course heard of the partial collapses from last evening. The media has been kept far away from the actual ground zero area where all of this happened. However, earlier, just a few moments ago, I returned from an area where we were able to penetrate all the way to Cortlandt and Church, and there you can see the rescuers close up as we've not seen them until now before, hauling really by hand the debris, as well as using heavy machinery digging, and this is, I believe, a glimpse of building number 5, which also was severely damaged. We told you yesterday about building number 6 being unstable. Well, building number 5, World Trade Building number 5, is also severely damaged. You can see here the impact of the buildings, one on the other. I asked a rescuer down here, which building is that? They said, you know, I don't even think we know which one is which. But you can see the intensity of the wreckage here, and the smoke still rising, mostly because the wind has been blowing, has been very consistent in moving this debris up into the air. This you're looking at here is I believe the Millennium Hotel. I'm trying to, I believe that is, or that could be the Century 21 building. They're next door to one another, and the windows are severely blown out. The flag, however, the American flag is still flying high, and the firefighters and the rescuers, the police officers, point to that flag and say it is a symbol that their spirit is undiminished, and their efforts to find anyone who might still be alive under all this rubble will not stop. We want to also give you an idea that here on the scene you get a very strong sense from an earlier tour I took of what these rescuers are facing.
Moving toward ground zero is a descent into a kind of hell. The air is thick and toxic, collapsed buildings unstable and dangerous. Still, hundreds of rescuers move in.
You guys be careful, all right?
Firefighters, police officers, medical personnel, construction workers, National Guardsmen, working around the clock to find anyone who might still be alive under the rubble. A team of firefighters after a 12-hour shift of digging. They are dusty, exhausted. One says, "I just want to go home." Moving closer still to the front of what's left of World Trade Tower number 1, they're flattened on the right, dwarfed now by the Customs building on the left, also severely damaged. In this overwhelming chaos, rescuers search, using heavy equipment to lift tons of twisted wreckage. They've brought in cranes, infrared equipment, human-seeking dogs, and robotic machines to find any signs of life. The work is physically and emotionally draining too, for not only are rescuers finding remains of people who worked in the building, but also they know that after the towers were hit, hundreds of their brethren firefighters rushed in and were still inside when the towers collapsed, first one and then the other. The faces of rescuers who've been in the rubble hint at what they've seen and the courage it takes to carry on. It is courage they will need for days, even weeks to come.
One of the issues now, one of the biggest problems facing these rescuers is fatigue. They are getting so tired working these 12-hour shifts, sometimes more hours than that. And so they're going to need help over the coming days and weeks. And one of the issues is, however, that they don't want people just rushing down here as they did yesterday, firefighters coming in from all parts outside of New York, because the streets yesterday at least were clogged with people who were just coming in. They're asking people to get coordinated, that firefighters, people with firefighting skills, call the city's fire headquarters, that the people of police skills call the police headquarters, construction workers call the Department of Buildings, medical personnel call hospitals to coordinate the effort so that they can bring these people in an orderly fashion to help relieve some of the people who are exhausted by the work so far. I can also tell you that there are a number of volunteers down there in the center of it, in the center of this ground zero area, who've come down and who've been coordinated through these offices, these sort of sites that have been established where they sign in, they fill out forms, and they've come down here to help haul away this material. The effort here is desperate. They're doing everything they can, Matt, to get these people, anybody who may be left, and whatever they may find that may be important to the investigation out. So that it can be analyzed. Thank you so much, Matt. Back to you.
All right, let me ask you a question, Ann, because I'm a little confused on something. Last night I was watching some coverage, and I heard that a building that was being referred to as One Liberty Place was in danger of collapse. Now, I know that some of these buildings are known by a couple of different names. Did that building collapse?
What we have been told here, now I have not been able to go around to see that because that is around from where I was able to go just a short time ago. Around from there, I was told that there was, some people here have told me that there was some structural damage. Now, I'm here, okay, no, I heard that it was a partial structural damage, partial collapse. You're saying it, okay. That apparently is erroneous. I'm sorry if I've reported some misinformation because I've been corrected here by David Bloom, who says that he's found out other information. At any rate, let me tell you that there are lots of reports of concerns about buildings, and I tell you, looking at the pictures I showed you just a short time ago, you can understand why. There is tremendous instability in the buildings all around. The Millennium Building is a hotel is still standing, but the windows are knocked out, and it's clearly an unstable place and a dangerous place for people to be around. Many buildings all around have been damaged severely. So that's probably where we get some of these reports from people here on the scene about some of these partial collapses that probably, as we now heard, have not happened.
Okay.
But it's very unstable, Matt.
All right, Ann, thanks very much. That's Ann Curry in Lower Manhattan this morning.
So many workers, of course, report to work every day down there, and it's going to be a long, long time before things get back to any sense of normalcy down there. You know, Matt, oftentimes in these terrible disasters, and hasn't been anything like this certainly in our lifetime, you hear these miracle stories, and you and I both heard rumors or actually reports, but we couldn't place them, about one firefighter, and I just have some information about him. It says a firefighter fell 83 floors from the World Trade Center and survived. He was helping to evacuate the building when it collapsed. He plummeted more than 1,000 feet. Rescuers were stunned when they later found him on the ground alive. He told them he, quote, curled himself into a ball and rolled down floor by floor as the building fell down. A rescue worker said he was conscious. He knew his name and where he lived and how many kids he had. He was just a little uncomfortable.
You think about it, he's 80 floors up, but there are floors on top of him.
I mean, it's
collapsing.
just...
That he survived is beyond a miracle.
Anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and since we were trying to find out more about this, I thought I'd share it with you and the rest of our viewers. Meanwhile, as you know, Matt, the Federal Emergency Management Agency has dispatched several urban search and rescue teams to New York and Washington to help locate victims trapped in collapsed buildings. FEMA's Marco Bourne is at the Pentagon this morning. Marco, good morning.
Good morning, Katie.
Tell me about the search and rescue efforts that FEMA is involved in.
Well, we have 4 teams deployed here to the Pentagon and 8 teams currently deployed up in New York doing search and rescue work, and they're working 2 teams at a time here in shifts of 12 hours, and that's going to continue indefinitely.
Marco, how many people on a team?
Roughly 62 people per team.
Wow.
And they have additional support personnel that are with them. And we also have what are called incident support team people from FEMA headquarters in our regions that come in and help coordinate their activities on site and also provide the logistical support they need to get equipment and material in. And at the same time, we still have 16 urban search and rescue teams in the system that are on alert and standing by should we need to bring them in to either spell the folks that are here now or provide additional assistance if the opportunity arises.
Marco, I know that these urban search and rescue teams are highly trained, their skills highly specialized. Tell me a little bit about their training and what they are able to do that many other people on the scene may not be able to.
Well, they're a number of unique individual specialties. We have doctors who are part of the disaster medical assistance teams and paramedics who are very used to trauma medicine and very dangerous conditions. There are rescue specialists who know how to look through small void spaces and use some specialized camera equipment and listening devices to get into those areas that you just can't see from the outside. There are specialized rescue engineers who take a look at collapsed structures and find out where the danger spots are for our own rescuers, but also try to identify where there might be void spaces where potential people who are trapped and still alive may be. Plus the dogs, which everybody knows, do a tremendous job, and an entire support staff that's there to provide them communications and equipment, and of course all the volunteers providing water and food and places for these people to relax during their off hours.
Have they expressed frustration to you, Marco, that they can't actually get into some of the areas because it is still so structurally unsound?
What we've seen is nothing but really quiet determination. These people have an esprit de corps which is to be commended. They're diligent, they're going to work hard, they're not giving up, and they're going to keep going until we've exhausted every possibility of finding someone alive.
This is such a protracted process, unfortunately. Are you all able, frankly, many people here in New York, and I'm sure in the Washington area, because I imagine there have been firefighters and police from all sorts of jurisdictions helping out at the Pentagon. But what about these people who refuse to stop working? Some of these firefighters who have been on the scene for 48 hours. I mean, at some point, they need to take a break. I mean, and they're putting their own lives at risk just from the pressure and stress of being there.
We try to provide them with as much rest time and relaxation period as we can, and certainly we try to get them also off-site to do that. When they're not in their 12-hour operational period, they're taken to another area where they can get away from all of the activity here and the noise and have a chance to sit back and relax. And there are people there that they can talk to, critical incident stress folks, because while they are determined to do this job, they're not unfeeling, and they certainly grieve for the victims. They grieve for their fellow firefighters in New York who unfortunately may have perished. And their goal really is to do as much as they can, and we're going to provide them the rest they need and the assistance they need to continue their work.
Well, Marco Bourne of the Federal Emergency Management Agency talking about the urban search and rescue teams that have been dispatched to the Pentagon and, of course, to New York City. Marco, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
9:49, now here's Matt.
Katie, in Washington, D.C. and New York City, thousands of families are desperately searching for information on their loved ones, praying that they are alive. Cynthia Modis Wilson worked on the 79th floor of the World Trade Center Tower number 1. She's been missing since Tuesday. Her children are Patricia and Braulio Modis. Good morning to both of you. I know it's an enormously difficult time, and we appreciate you coming in to at least tell us a part of this story. Your mom worked on the 79th floor,
Yes.
which is, this is the tower we're talking about that was hit by the first plane?
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's right.
Now, she was able to make some phone calls after the plane impacted that building. Tell me a little bit about the calls that she made.
The first call that I think she made was to my work number. It was at 8:51 in the morning where she left me a message.
And keep in mind the plane struck at 8:42.
Yes.
So just a few minutes later.
After, she said that she's okay, there's really nothing to worry about, and that she would call me back as soon as it was over.
Then she didn't seem as if she was going to evacuate based on that message, did she?
No, actually she didn't really know what was going on based on the message. She wasn't sure whether a plane had hit she guessed that a plane had hit the building, but she wasn't really sure what happened. I guess being inside the building, it's hard to tell.
And on that recorded message, there was no panic in her voice?
Her voice was a little bit shaky, but more I guess, shocked or stunned, but not where she was fearing for her life.
She made other calls after that as time progressed. Tell me about some of those.
Yeah, she was able to call my stepfather. During that time, I was told by my stepfather that the room or the floor was starting to get very smoky, and there was really no way of her getting out of the floor because the hallways around her had already collapsed, as well as the bathrooms, and there was really no way out. So they were told to just sit tight, and the rescuers were just to wait for the rescuers to come.
The protocol was to remain calm, remain in one place so that the rescuers could help them as opposed to them running around the building.
Yes, and my stepfather was giving her tips over the telephone on what she can do. She had some water, she could wet a piece of rag or something, put it over her mouth, stay close to the ground.
At some point you tried to contact her?
Yes, I tried calling her as soon as I saw it on TV, which was somewhere between 9 and I guess 9:10. I was able to reach the answering machine at work, and it said that the telephone operators weren't on the line.
When was the last call that you received or someone received from your mom?
I'm not exactly sure about the exact time, but it was somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes before her building collapsed. And this call was to our granduncle.
Leo, I know you don't live in New York City.
I live in Flushing.
Flushing, and when you heard what was going on, you went to some extraordinary lengths to get to.
Yeah, well, I got on the train, and I was sitting on the train, and right when I sat down was when they decided, like, to stop all service. So I jumped in the cab. Cab only took me so far, so I had to walk down the highway and walk over the Williamsburg Bridge, and I just ran to my sister's house. I knew I had to go to my sister's house and just be with her. And, you know, like throughout that whole time, I saw the buildings were on fire, and then by the time I got by the Williamsburg, they weren't there anymore.
You watched the building collapse on television?
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been enormously disheartening.
Yeah. At first, I didn't even know which building she was in because I never really knew which was 1 and which was 2. And when the first one came down, I was terrified, and I was still hoping that she would be on the second one that was still standing. And then when that collapsed, I just didn't know how to react. I just broke down.
Are you optimistic? I know you've been dealing with the Red Cross. You've gone to hospitals and looking for any information.
All day yesterday, I went to like every single hospital. We called every single number that they offer, and they're being really helpful on being what they can do. You know, they give a lot of people food online. They're giving everybody drinks. You know, just keeping everybody calm, but they can't answer any of our questions. They don't really know. We don't know how long we're gonna find out. Maybe days, weeks, months are gonna go by, and just don't really know. Nobody knows.
Well, we will continue to pray for you and your family and your mom.
Thank you for having us. We just really wanted to show our mom's picture and get it out there so that if anybody at all saw her there, if any of the firefighters saw them, we believe that she was with 4 other co-workers because it was a very small company, and we just hope and pray that they were all together and that they were comforting one another through this.
Patricia and Braulio Modis, thanks and good luck.
Thank you.
It's 54 past the hour. Here's Katie.
All right, thank you, Matt. American airspace is being reopened at 11 o'clock Eastern Time on a limited basis, as we've been reporting. Bob Hager is at Washington's Ronald Reagan National Airport with a quick update. Bob?
Katie, yes, it's going to go very slowly. We're beginning to hear from the big airlines now. For instance, Southwest and Alaska Airlines will not try to operate at all today. Delta says it's going to have very limited service, only to pick up a few of its stranded passengers. That's it for the day. Continental, the same, only to pick up stranded passengers. United Airlines, they've had 2 of those kind of flights already to pick up stranded passengers, but there's nothing scheduled until after 6 p.m. from United Airlines, and that could change. So again, it indicates that this is going to start very slowly, and it's probably tomorrow or even a little later tomorrow that things begin to get back to where scheduled flights are have to leave at scheduled times. Katie?
Okay, Bob Hager in Washington. Bob, thank you very much. Matt, there's been so many acts of small kindnesses and big kindnesses. I'm just reading about a jar in the front of a supermarket in Illinois. They collected $118,000. 2 postal workers left $660 from their colleagues. An Army recruiter emptied his wallet and went back to the bank to give more.
There are reports downtown in Manhattan, people who want to do something but who aren't trained and not being allowed near the rubble are standing on the sides of the road simply cheering the rescuers on as they drive toward what was that building.
And I know both you and I thought this was so poignant. An ad taken out by the people of Oklahoma City, New York City, and Washington, D.C. Oklahoma cares. You stood with us in our darkest hour. Now we stand with you. And that's from the people of Oklahoma and the Oklahoma City National Memorial.
Front page of the New York Post this morning, Katie. Some people are calling this our generation's version of Iwo Jima. It's a poignant picture.
That's right. The enormity of this tragedy, Matt, clearly is very hard to comprehend. The numbers unclear at this point. Thousands, as you know, are feared dead. But I think you and I agree it's very important to look beyond the numbers, to remember the individuals lost, each with his or her own story to tell. Here's NBC's Bob Faw.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
As the choking dust wafted north, information about victims crawled slowly across TV screens, and around the country, newspapers began publishing those terrible, grainy photographs. Karen Kincaid, only 40, a rising star in the legal world. A few, the executive producer of Frasier, David Angel, TV commentator Barbara Olson, wife of the government's top lawyer, and Barry Berenson, widow of actor Anthony Perkins. A few were well known. And while some wielded power, Neil Levin, head of the New York, New Jersey Port Authority, and some came from wealth, Andrew Stern, a 41-year-old broker on the 104th floor, Jack Aaron, 52, in insurance on the 95th, most, like 39-year-old Myra Rodriguez, a secretary on the 102nd floor, or Lisa Frost on her way back to California after recently graduating from Boston University, most were not likely to show up on the 11 o'clock news.
I'm sad that my daughter's gone. I will miss her tremendously. There's nothing that can ever take her place.
Flight crews, the first perhaps to comprehend the horror, were among the first to be identified. American Airlines Captain John Ogonowski, whose 767 was the first to crash into the World Trade Center. Victor Saraceni, whose United jetliner was the second. That crash in the Pennsylvania woods also claimed C.C. Lyles, a flight attendant less than 1 year, and a mother.
She was the best woman I ever met in my life, and just love her so much. It was a great mother.
Some died just doing their duty. Peter Gansey, highest-ranking uniformed member of the New York City Fire Department. Some, like Georgetown University professor Leslie Whittington, 45, were at the top of their careers. Others, like her 8-year-old daughter Zoe and 3-year-old daughter Dana, won't get that chance.
It is a heartbreak of overwhelming proportion.
Like flight attendant Sarah Lowe, 28, each was guilty only of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. As the dust settles, hope fades, but it does not die.
We love you, Leah. Please come back home.
So many already, so many more yet to come. Said New York's mayor, it will be more than we can bear. It'll...
We need healing and we need love.
We just really need to work together right now.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Good morning. Shaken to its core, the nation pulls together in the face of the devastating attack on America. And new details about the tragedy are emerging today, Thursday, September 13th, 2001.
From NBC News, this is a special edition of Today, Attack on America, with Katie Couric and Matt Lauer.
And good morning. Welcome to Today on this Thursday morning, another difficult day. I'm Matt Lauer.
And I'm Katie Couric. Tuesday, September 11th will forever be a milestone in U.S. history. Time will be divided into before and after, but of course it's unending for emergency workers toiling around the clock in Lower Manhattan, where several buildings near Ground Zero are in danger of collapsing.
In the wake of the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, Americans are rallying around President Bush. According to new NBC News poll numbers, 80% of people approve of how the president is handling the attack. 83% of Americans believe that the United States should take forceful military action against the people responsible for the attacks, even if that means risking further retaliation and the threat of war. 66% say the attacks are more serious than the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And now, according to President Bush's aides, officials had, quote, real and credible information, end quote, that the White House itself had been the original target of the plane that hit the Pentagon. And the Secret Service received a phone call after that attack that, quote, Air Force One is next, unquote.
Let's bring you up to date on what we know now. Limited commercial air travel will resume today. The government officially opening American airspace at 11 o'clock Eastern time on a limited basis. The stock markets remain closed, and the grim casualty count keeps growing. We've known for 2 days now that 266 people were killed in the hijacked jetliners. Pentagon officials say about 190 people are dead. Hospitals in the area report that at least 94 people were treated for injuries. Here in New York, of course, the devastation obviously much worse. The true scale almost impossible to imagine. Thousands still missing. Only 82 bodies have been recovered from the estimated 450,000 tons of debris from the devastated Twin Towers. A handful pulled out alive. It's been reported that people looking for loved ones are taking pictures of their relatives on their shirts or on TV trucks in the hopes that somehow someone will recognize them and know where they are. New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani estimates that 3,700 people are missing.
Of course, we're trying to remember this is not about numbers. This is about people, and the personal stories of those people are very important. One woman named Melissa Hughes was attending a meeting on the 101st floor of one of the towers when the plane struck. She left this message for her husband on an answering machine.
Sean, it's me. I just wanted to let you know I love you, and I'm stuck in this building in New York. A plane hit the building or a bomb went off. We don't know, but there's lots of smoke, and I just wanted you to know that I love you always. Bye.
Melissa Hughes' husband is still trying to find her, and we're learning more details this morning about the people who may have been involved in this brutal attack and how they did it. Investigators say that each jetliner was hijacked by groups of 3 to 6 men armed with box cutters and plastic knives, but many more people could have been involved. Word early this morning, one arrest has been made in Hamburg, Germany in connection to the attack. Federal authorities said that the hijackers were followers of Islamic militant Osama bin Laden.
We'll have all the latest developments throughout the morning, but first, NBC's David Bloom is in Lower Manhattan, where search and recovery efforts continue. David, good morning.
Good morning, Katie. I want to first update you on that casualty figure. You mentioned
Rudolph Giuliani, the New York City mayor, saying that as many as 3,700 workers may have been trapped inside the Twin Towers at the time of the two attacks. That is, of course, merely the best guesswork that New York City officials can give us at this hour. But if that casualty figure, that death toll, is anywhere near accurate, it would mean that the total death toll from these attacks could exceed 4,000 if you include the deaths at the Pentagon, as well as the 266 people killed aboard the 4 planes that were crashed. I want to show you a live picture right now of the recovery operations going on here in Lower Manhattan. These workers, many of them covered with soot, dazed, are telling us that they're literally using everything that they can get their hands on, including their hands, shovels, crowbars, cranes, blowtorches, to try to proceed with this recovery. They're using listening devices, video cameras, heat sensors to try to find victims who might still be trapped inside the rubble. But frankly, and forgive me for the graphic nature of this, the search dogs, they say, are simply being overwhelmed by the smell of human flesh. They are recovering mostly not bodies, only 82 reported recovered thus far, but rather just fragments of human flesh. In fact, some of the people who are going here in New York City to the family trauma centers to get information about their loved ones are being told to come back with a brush, with a comb, something that might contain a piece of hair that could be later used for DNA matching of the victims. Of course, one of the biggest concerns this morning remains the possible collapse of other buildings surrounding the World Trade Center. Last night, 2 buildings of particular concern, Millennium Plaza and another larger building known as One Liberty Plaza. As nightfall approaches, it's clear the 54-story black glass building is not about to collapse. So emergency workers again start hauling tons of twisted steel and debris from the remains of the World Trade Center. Not because it's safe, authorities admit, but because it's their only hope if there are still survivors.
This is a very dangerous rescue effort. That shouldn't. It's going to continue to be a dangerous rescue effort for some time.
But is it worth the risk? At last count, 202 firefighters and 57 police officers are already missing. But one New York cop, trapped in the rubble for an hour and a half that first day, says yes.
It's pitch black. You can't see. It's very dark. But you hear people screaming in the darkness, help me.
But on Wednesday, rescue workers find only 3 more victims alive. A total, the mayor says, of just 5 survivors, despite the search dog teams and the prayers of anxious relatives who gather at nearby hospitals holding pictures of missing loved ones.
We all need somebody to lean on.
As New Yorkers come together for a candlelight vigil last night, Mayor Giuliani estimates Tuesday's attacks killed thousands. The city requests body bags. And the New York Times reports this morning that 1,500 workers are missing from just 3 of the hundreds of companies that used to call the Twin Towers home. I spoke this morning to a very badly shaken paramedic who told me a horrifying story about 2 brothers here in New York City, one a firefighter, one a New York cop. The firefighter raced into one of the World Trade Centers just a moment before it's collapsed. The paramedic told me that his brother, the New York cop, has been standing a silent, somber vigil at the spot where his brother died for the last 2 days, refusing food, refusing water, just trying to stand where his brother apparently died. Katie, back to you.
That's heartbreaking. David, by the way, we just got a bulletin over the wire that said Mayor Giuliani is now saying 4,763 people are missing from the World Trade Center destruction. I guess they're coming up with those numbers, David, by talking to companies and seeing who has been accounted for?
That's exactly right, Katie. They're talking to companies who housed literally tens of thousands of workers inside the Twin Towers, as well as states, local governments, police departments, which had buildings inside. Again, these numbers are bound to change, but that 4,700 figure would put the death toll at more than 5,000 from these attacks.
Hard to believe. David Bloom. David, thank you very much for that report. I know we'll be checking in with you throughout the morning. 9 minutes after the hour. Now here's Matt.
And Katie, word now that the White House has declared tomorrow, Friday, a national day of prayer and remembrance. FBI and other federal agents are scouring the country this morning following thousands of leads in search of those responsible for these attacks. NBC's justice correspondent Pete Williams.
This is a News 10 NBC special report. America under siege.
We are waiting for a news conference to get underway at the Rochester International Airport. Now, county officials are expected to update us on the situation about air travel in this country and here in Rochester. Let's go to the county executive, Jack Doyle.
At its meeting, which was postponed from Tuesday, to adopt a resolution requesting all of our residents to fly the American flag at their home or at their place of business. And tomorrow at noon, we're asking that all those who, all the churches and all of those who possess bells through whatever method possible, to ring the bells in their churches for a period of 5 minutes starting at noon tomorrow to show our solidarity to those communities in New York City and Washington, D.C. that have been so tragically affected by this disaster. I think this demonstrates through our legislative body, and we're here with Carla Boyce, one of our legislators. This demonstrates to our community and with all of our residents that there is a degree of solidarity. I had a citizen come up to me last night and said to me, well, what can I do to show that I'm supportive of this effort to unite America? And that really was the inspiration to come up with this concept of ringing the bells tomorrow at noon and obviously to fly the American flag. So I think that's something that we can do, and we'd ask all of our citizens to participate in that, and I'm sure the legislature will adopt that resolution tonight. Now, with respect to the airport, I'm going to ask Terry Slaybaugh to give you an update. You have to understand that this is an ongoing fluid situation that is less than perfect right now, and we want to emphasize that people should not expect to be able to fly out of this airport today in any event. There may be some exceptions, but the general rule is that there will be no flying out of this airport, but anyone interested should obviously contact their carrier with whom they have a ticket before they make any steps to come out here to the airport. So, Terry, why don't you give us an update then?
Yeah, we have, as we announced earlier today, and as most of you know now, Secretary Mineta of Department of Transportation, he did have a release last night or early this morning announcing that he was ordering the aviation system to be reopened today at 11 o'clock. Also at the same time, he announced that there would be a process for reopening the airports across the country, and that airports would be phased into the system as the Federal Aviation Administration certifies that they have met the new heightened security requirements for those facilities. We are in the process right now of having our airport certified. We currently are not certified by the FAA to reopen. We've had meetings this morning with all of the airline managers here in Rochester. We've had a couple of conversations with our Federal Aviation Administration Security Office in Pittsburgh, and we are still in the process of finalizing our security program with them. As the county executive has indicated, we do not expect today to see passengers utilizing the Greater Rochester International Airport. And really that's coming from two different directions. One is after meeting with the air carriers and talking about their activities today in our market, it does not appear that any of the airlines have plans to have scheduled service with passengers in Rochester. We did have one commercial aircraft arrive this morning at approximately 10 o'clock. JetBlue was the first commercial aircraft to be ferried into Rochester from the Buffalo airport. That was undertaken so that they could reposition that aircraft, and that aircraft will most likely be their first flight out of Rochester. Tentatively, that first flight would be their first flight out tomorrow morning. We anticipate that a number of the airlines here before the end of the day may take the opportunity to redirect aircraft either out of Rochester or have aircraft brought into Rochester tonight. You know, as I said yesterday, for us to have a full schedule of service for Friday morning, we would have to have approximately 29 aircraft on the ground in Rochester. As far as the certification process, we have, as I stated, been in communications with the FAA Security Office. We're in the process right now of taking some additional steps after they have reviewed the steps we've already taken. You will notice throughout the day that we will be relocating some automobiles in our parking garage and in our parking lot. We also will be restricting parking in a couple of parking lots that are up adjacent to the terminal. We anticipate that we will have that completed by mid-afternoon, mid to late afternoon, and we anticipate at that point that we'd be in a position to be certified by the FAA and would be able to reopen. But as the county executive has mentioned, this has been a very fluid process. Both the Federal Aviation Administration, the airports and the airlines have had to take very slow steps in going through this process of trying to determine what we need to do. And a lot of that, again, I think is a result of what the federal government is finding out about the events that took place at the World Trade Center in New York City and in Pennsylvania.
Could you elaborate as to why relocation?
Well, we're going to hold off a minute. We want the sheriff to say a few things about airport security.
We've beefed up staff here to come in compliance with the FAA standards, and we're also going to be working very closely with the tow companies and with the passengers as they start to return to make sure that they are able to locate their cars and to be able to easily get through the airport process. As you can see, that much of the traffic lanes have been restricted and will be restricted throughout the day today, but we are going to make it as smooth as possible for anybody trying to access the airport to be able to do their business as far as getting their vehicles if they've returned by car or by rental car or something like that up to this point.
Well, wait, hold on. Terry wants to say one other thing.
Yeah. I just want to mention the other thing we're going to look at. Obviously, a lot of people left their cars here before the tragic events on Tuesday. One of the things that we would like to have announced through the media is as people return to Rochester, once we begin to operate again, there will be no charge for the cars that have been parked here during the last few days as the events have unfolded. Once we are certified to reopen and we do have scheduled service and people begin to arrive at the airport again, then we'll begin to charge for parking and ramp up that operation. But we are, again, we're in the process right now of finalizing our security program. We have had an additional request from the Federal Aviation Administration that we relocate vehicles within 300 feet of the terminal. We requested some clarification on that yesterday. We have spoke with them this morning. We've come to a decision, both the airport and the FAA, and we anticipate that by mid to late afternoon today, we'll have those cars moved and we'd be in a position to be certified and be reopened. At the current time, while we are not recertified by the FAA or certified to open, we do have permission to have these commercial aircraft operations that are moving aircraft between airports, and you will today probably see a few of those operations in and out of Rochester.
Could you take us, I think it might be helpful, to take us to the typical scenario of a passenger when the airport does become fully operational as opposed to the typical passenger who came here a week ago? In other words, what will be the differences when they arrive in terms of where they will park, how they will check in, if they can check in up here, and how long that process might now take?
Well, I think most of that has been covered, but in Rochester, obviously, there won't be curbside check-in. You won't be allowed to spend any length of time in front of the airport. We're going to eliminate parking, the first rows of parking in the garage and some of the parking in the short-term lot. You're going to have to take all your baggage to the ticket counters to check in. You're going to have to be ticketed to go down the concourses, and the process for getting through security and boarding the aircraft is going to be much longer than it has been.
So nobody will be able to park within 300 feet ever again?
At the current time, until further notice, which I guess, Dave, is indefinitely, we will not be able to have cars parked within 300 feet of the building.
Do you have enough room to accommodate cars?
We have ample parking at the Greater Rochester International Airport. We have overflow parking that we put in the last year and a half.
How many people take the cars to be counted down?
We're in the process right now of moving those cars. We do have, it's not a new phenomena. We do operate a very large parking operation here, and we do move cars in our parking garage that are unattended. And so we're in the process today of putting that in place. We already have people under contract that do that for us. The parking operator is keeping track of the cars. He'll be making a record of where the cars are and where they've been moved to, and we'll come up with a process of letting people know where their vehicles are.
Terry, can you walk our viewers through the process probably tomorrow when they actually are either being dropped off by someone, friend or family, or they're bringing their car here, just briefly? What do they do?
Well, Ray, I think I mean, what they do is, as I stated, they're either going to park in short-term parking and come into the building, or they're going to pull up to the arrivals road, and they're going to be allowed to drop people off and empty their bags out of the car, and then they're going to have to keep their vehicle moving. We're not going to have vehicles standing anymore within 300 feet of the terminal.
Sorry, what about the two?
Pardon me? No, the airport right now, the status of the airport has not changed. The airport is closed. Passengers should continue to contact the airlines for flight information. We do not anticipate today that we will have passenger traffic here, which means more than likely we will not open the airport until we know we're going to take passengers.
Do you have any idea of tomorrow morning?
Right now, based on the events of the past few days, I don't have any idea when that will happen. I know it's everyone's goal, as it was the Secretary of Transportation's in his press release, that we have an active aviation system in this country. Beginning at 11 o'clock today, that process is going to begin. We hope to be part of that process within the next 24 hours. That's what we'll be trying to do. But the airlines, you have to understand again, we are a small entity in this whole process. There are very large airports in the country that are not ready. The air carriers are not ready. I understand United Airlines does not feel comfortable with where they are in the new security requirements issued by the FAA to them. They are not prepared to begin operations with passengers on their airplanes. So until those carriers are ready, we're not going to have air service in Rochester.
Terry, we get the word from the FAA and from other federal officials that flying is going to be completely different now, to the point where no plastic utensils, women can't carry purses on. I thought just crossed my mind yesterday, that has to be a hassle for you here on the airport end, because some kind of provisions have to be made for, all right, here's my purse, put it in a plastic bag, how do I get that back? I have children with me. Have you made plans for that kind of stuff?
Well, you have to understand, again, as airport operators, I'm responsible for the perimeter security of the airport, for the terminal building, and for security of the sterile area of the airport where the airplanes are. The airlines are responsible for the screening process, for the boarding of their aircraft, and they're looking at all of those issues. We obviously have issues with concessionaires. Right now, the Federal Aviation Administration is providing definitions of what type of utensils may be available in airports, for example, at our food court. We're going through a process right now of auditing what is what is available in our Hudson News stores here in Rochester that we're going to have to eliminate. What is in the U.S. Air Club? What is in our bars that we have on each concourse? So we're going through a process right now of trying to ascertain, number one, what is the definition being given to us by the FAA? Is it the final definition? We've been issued, in the last 2.5 days, probably 7 different updates of the original directive that was given to us within the first 24 hours of the initial event. So this process is very fluid, and it's not, you're not going to get definition on a lot of these issues until our airport opens and we're operational.
Sheriff Glenn, you said that you have to beef up staff to comply with the new FAA regulations. Can you quantify that by how many more people do you need, or what types of people?
I don't really want to get into our specific staffing levels, but we have increased staff over here to make sure that we have coverage on the exterior of the perimeter and also throughout the interior of the building and in the secure areas of the airport.
I'm hearing dogs bark. Are we typically going to see dogs here every day now?
Dogs will be responding on a more frequent basis, I'm sure. Right now, any of the planes that are on the ground, we will be checking out before they board and take off. But any of the ones coming in, it will be up to the air carrier. If there is an issue, then we would provide the canine support at that point.
Jeff, I asked you this question yesterday, but I have to ask it again. All of these new changes are going to cost money. Where is this money?
Well, I think Terry's mentioned already that the airlines are responsible for security within the terminal and with respect to passengers, and they have been paying the responsibility, meeting their responsibilities for that. With respect to the sheriff's perimeter obligations, we're prepared to assist the sheriff with whatever he needs for additional personnel with respect to security at the airport. But everyone has to understand that this is passed on to the airlines as a cost, and then this cost in some form or other is passed on to the traveling public. With respect to the question over here about the hassle involved with women not having their purses or whatever, the days of worrying about hassles are over. This is the way it's going to be, and we all got to live with it. So that's the way it is. Terry can tell you that Secretary Minetta's fax came to him at 1 o'clock in the morning. So that's what the airport officials are dealing with right now, a real state of fluidity, so to speak. And the fact is that things have changed, and as Dave points out, there are changes that people are going to have to come and expect and live with. And if people don't like it and they feel it's a hassle, then unfortunately they probably shouldn't fly at this juncture until things calm down.
Now, earlier you mentioned that Rochester has a habit of being a 15-minute airport. You can get in about 15 minutes.
Everybody knows about the convenience of our airport. 10 minutes from downtown, 15 minutes to get on the plane. You can do it within a half hour, even buy a coffee and a paper and get on the plane.
What about now?
Today, people are going to have to change their ways. Well, I think as Terry's pointed out, there's no question that even baggage check-in through the air carriers is going to be more difficult, more timely. So people better be prepared for that. It's going to affect all of us who travel. Anybody else got any questions? If not, we'll let you update you when we hear anything further. Thank you. Carla.
You have been listening live to the news conference underway at the Rochester International Airport with county officials. You heard the county executive say that people are going to have to change their ways if they're going to continue to fly. There are new rules and new circumstances that you need to know about. No airlines have plans to have scheduled service out of the Rochester International Airport in or out of Rochester today. So do not expect any flying out of the Rochester Airport today. As the national system gets underway, we could possibly see flights going out tomorrow morning. A JetBlue flight actually came in from Buffalo. They're just sending in the plane to prepare for tomorrow morning's flight out at the first thing in the morning. We want to let you know that the airport has not been certified by the FAA to reopen yet. They're still dealing with some of the security issues and adjustments that need to be made. For example, cars will no longer be allowed to park anywhere within 300 feet of the terminal, so they're actually having to move some vehicles at this point, and that will take till mid to late afternoon, and that's why things are being delayed. We also want to tell you that the county executive has asked that all residents fly the American flag, and tomorrow at noon he's asked that any church in the area that has access to bells to ring them for 5 minutes at noon to show solidarity with the folks in New York City and those dealing with tragedies in Washington at the Pentagon as well. That's the latest from News 10 NBC. I'm Rebecca LeClaire. Now back to network coverage.
Eradicate this threat, and you will be, and your people will be perfectly safe.
Senator John McCain, Senator McCain, thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie.
As people throughout the country wonder how it was that we didn't know this attack was coming, the United States began to round up backing from its allies today. NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell is standing by at the State Department. Andrea, good morning to you.
Good morning to you. I've actually moved up to our Washington bureau, but to follow up on what Katie was just discussing with John McCain, for the first time, Matt, in its 52-year military history, the NATO allies are pledging military support to the U.S. if, as expected, it is now proved that the attack came from outside the United States. The initial benefit, of course, is something the U.S. sorely needs: improved intelligence cooperation. Were U.S. intelligence forces caught flat-footed? With the counterterrorism budget doubling in the last 6 years to a proposed $13 billion, why was there no warning?
Historically, the American intelligence agencies have been the gold standard of the world for technologies, particularly communications technologies. In the last few years, we've lost that edge.
Or was there too much information? Perhaps a clue buried somewhere in millions of communications collected by listening posts around the world.
I doubt if there's a day goes by that the intelligence community doesn't have all sorts of threat warnings, and sifting those warnings out, coordinating it with other data, determining how much is real, how much is simply false alarms. That is a huge job.
Since the disaster, analysts are poring over their computers, searching for leads that might have been missed.
The problem is there's millions and millions of communications. One listening post picks up 2 million pieces of communications an hour. And the problem is sifting through all that.
Others say eliminating the terror threat will require sacrificing cherished liberties.
We have been operating in this field with one hand tied behind our backs for a long time, both in terms of the restrictions of the laws of privacy, and also in an unwillingness to see our people get our hands dirty by dealing with the kind of gutter types that it takes to infiltrate these organizations.
For now, the administration's top priority, isolating and tracking Osama bin Laden, the leading suspect in this case, by pressuring Afghanistan to stop protecting him.
These countries tend to put themselves at risk by harboring terrorist activity of this type. That's why it is in their interest to become part of a civilized world and get rid of this sort of activity and not let it perpetuate and exist within their borders.
Bin Laden already rejected by the country of his birth, Saudi Arabia.
Previously, his citizenship was terminated as a Saudi reaction to his terrorist activity.
And now today, for the first time, word that Pakistan may be willing to cooperate. Not yet clear exactly what extent that cooperation would be. Already there's been intelligence sharing, but perhaps military cooperation, or at least not preventing the U.S. from operating against Afghanistan if that is what is about to take place. But striking back against bin Laden or Afghanistan does carry serious risks for the United States and its moderate Arab allies. And U.S. officials know that if they take that step, they had better have the goods on bin Laden. They're suggesting that they already are on their way to having that kind of case.
Andrea, not to put you on the spot here, but because of the proximity between Afghanistan and Pakistan, can you explain the significance of that for the United States?
Sure. It's even been reported that bin Laden and some of his people have trained on Pakistani territory in some of those refugee camps. Certainly they've been harbored there. Pakistan has been one of the only nations in the world that has been friendly, in fact supportive, to its neighbor Afghanistan. So getting Pakistan's agreement is a very big deal indeed. Pakistani officials saying we've always cooperated with the United States. Not true. And in fact, it's been a very dicey relationship, even though we have a military relationship with Pakistan and military sharing and, as I say, intelligence sharing. They have not been as helpful as we need them to be. The State Department, Colin Powell, Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage are putting heavy pressure on Pakistan in the last 48 hours, and our ambassador and others in Pakistan itself have been working this case very, very hard. Today, some announcements out of Pakistan that they will cooperate. If they do, they could help pre-position Delta Force squads who might go in and do an extraction against bin Laden. They could be helpful if it ever came to the case of ground troops. Clearly, though, the primary element against Afghanistan, if it does take place, would be air power, most likely B-52s and cruise missiles.
All right, Andrea Mitchell upstairs in the Bureau in Washington. Andrea, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Katie?